and I will call the meeting to order. I guess I will start, make sure I got my system straight here with a roll call. And I will call your name and you can say here. Mayor Fournier.
Present, sir.
Commissioner Douglas.
Here.
Ms. Beakey. I know she'll be here.
I'm admitting her right now.
All right. Okay, Mr. Klooster.
Here.
Mr. Guntina.
Present.
All right, and you are Ann Beakey, you are on mute. There you are.
Here I am.
All right. We do not have Ann Barra. For the record, she respectfully resigned, I think 2 weeks ago or a week ago, and that's why I'm sitting in here as the chair, because you guys voted me the vice chair and the meeting I missed. Thank you very much. But I guess before we get started, I would like to say we want to thank Ann wherever she is. I've already thanked her for this, for her fine job she did as the chair and a member of this committee for a number of years. She was always a strong voice. And for the record, she made a fine contribution to this body, and we'll miss her. So, next order of business would be the approval of the agenda. And I think this is where Commissioner Douglas is going to ask to add something to the agenda. What's the right process here? If I ask to approve the agenda, that's where Commissioner Douglas can jump in, asking Mr. Liss or Tim that.
Certainly, yes. If you can either make a motion to approve it or approve the agenda with an added item.
All right, well, here's how I'm going to do it then. If the commissioners have read the agenda, does anyone have anything to add or comment? Commissioner Douglas.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Casada. I would like to add an item after G, a discussion to set a date for a more extended discussion of an evaluation of our meeting with the ZBA.
All right, can we, would you be pleased if we made that G5? Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. I would ask then, I don't know if we need a motion. Somebody, I would propose that the agenda be approved as presented with the addition of an extended discussion of our joint meeting with the ZBA added as item G5.
To be clear, I'm not looking for an extended discussion. I'm looking to create an item at which we will set a date for an extended discussion.
Thank you for the clarification.
And you do need a second.
I'll second.
All right, then I will call for the vote. All in favor? Mayor Fournier.
Aye.
Commissioner Douglas.
Yes.
Ms. Beakey.
Yes.
Mr. Klooster.
Yes.
Mr. Guntina.
Yes.
All right, the agenda is adopted. Next order of business is the approval of the minutes for September 8, 2020, which is in our packet. Is there a motion or discussion?
So moved.
I second.
All right, call for the vote. Mayor Fournier.
Aye.
Commissioner Douglas.
Yes.
Ms. Beakey.
Yes.
Mr. Klooster.
Yes.
Mr. Guntina.
Yes.
All right, the minutes for September 8th, 2020 regular meeting are approved. Next order of business is public comment on non-agenda items. We had some public comment on agenda items. These are non-agenda items, right, Tim?
Yes, and I believe we've received one public comment on both of the public hearing items. I don't believe there are any under this item.
Okay, so we would hear those in connection with those items.
That's correct.
Okay. So no public comment on non-agenda items. We move on to the first order new business, which is a public hearing, RZ 20-10-02, rezoning from commercial neighborhood business to general business, 1600 North Stephenson Highway. Mr. Twing, can you give us a rundown?
Certainly. This request the Planning Commission has received is a conventional rezoning request. In what I mean, you've seen several PUD requests, planned unit development requests, or conditional rezoning requests. This is a request to rezone the reference property, 1600 North Stephenson Highway, in a conventional manner, meaning if you move forward with a recommendation of approval, it would go to the City Commission to simply rezone the property from neighborhood business to general business. There is no associated site plan or proposed use in front of you this evening. Anything, if it were to be rezoned to general business, other than the gym that currently occupies the site, the Royal Oak Gym, would have to either submit revised plans, potentially be dealt with administratively, potentially need site plan approval or special land use, depending on what was presented if the rezoning were to go forward. As you indicated, this site is currently zoned neighborhood business. Again, the petitioner is asking to rezone it to general business. As we've indicated in the report, the land use master plan identifies the property as general commercial. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's designated for general business. There are areas that are designated under the master plan as general commercial that are currently zoned neighborhood business as well. Some of those are on Rochester Road, some on Campbell, and obviously the ones on Stephenson Highway. Your evaluation is, at this point, is really a determination as to whether this site is appropriate for general business and the type of uses that would be allowed in that district. And you'll see a list of all those permitted uses as well as special land uses listed in the staff report. Part of your evaluation is obviously the criteria in terms of findings, and we've listed all of those findings on the last page or so of the staff report, items A through I, in terms of your review. Again, this is a recommendation. It would go up to the City Commission for its final consideration. I guess I'll stop there and see if there's any questions.
I have a question right off the bat here. I looked at the master plan, and indeed, I had read it before, but I had not picked up on this. We currently have neighborhood business and general business. We don't have in our zoning ordinance something called general commercial. That's something that's in the master plan, correct?
That's correct. It's a land use term that's in the master plan. You've got more zoning districts than you do master plan districts, so you'll see that in there. They don't match up precisely.
Right, they don't match up precisely. I think this is important for the record. Am I allowed to share a screen? Can I ask the administrator that?
That's Carol, it's not me.
Okay, Carol, am I allowed to? Okay, so you're saying.
Done.
Okay, I can do that now. Okay, good. All right, let's just see here. That's buildings. I'm going to have to skip over here. So this is what I understand is that these are our zoning designations. And then in the master plan, let's see, there's, I have to find it, sorry. Here. So this is from the master plan, this page that I'm showing here. And the future land use categories are on the left, and you see here that includes general commercial, and there's these rough categories here that general commercial would include general business and neighborhood businesses 1 and 2 and office service. But also in the master plan, for the record, I think we should understand that the master plan also talks about general commercial, including, and I've switched to another page in the master plan, I think this might be page 55 or something. General commercial, they've described it as primarily the Woodward corridor, northwest portion of the city on Meyer Drive, select areas along Stephenson Highway and Campbell Road. So the purpose for my bringing this up is that I did the research, and it appears to me, and I'm bouncing this off Mr. Twing to make sure I'm correct about this, is that even though the categories don't match, the general commercial uses are similar and overlap with some of our general business categories. Is that correct? Oh, you're on mute, Tim.
Sorry. I got two different screens. I got to keep turning which one's which. The neighborhood business, office service, the uses that are permitted in those zoning districts are also generally permitted in the general business zoning district. There are a few that are not, that are allowed there, so it kind of pyramids into it. And as I said, I think the discussion is this evening is whether this particular area of Royal Oak on Stephenson Highway would fall into a category that would be appropriate for general business zoning.
All right, and if I'm reading your write-up correctly, the A through I factors that we consider, we're considering those. This is not a requirement that the petitioner meet each one of these, but the planning commissioners are supposed to consider each one of them into making their determination, as I understand it. Is that correct?
That's correct. As part of your fact finding and part of your discussion, you should make your decisions based on those.
All right, very good. Well, I will ask as the petitioner here, they look like they are.
We are.
Could you introduce yourself for the record, please? Oh, wait a minute, time out, I got a
Sure, yeah, I have a question.
Commissioner Douglas.
Thank you. Mr. Twing, should you have discussed this proposal with the city of Madison Heights, given, as you look at the map, that the buildings immediately to the east of this building and the ones that are attached to it are actually in the city of Madison Heights?
We generally don't have a direct discussion with the surrounding community, although when we mail out notices, they're included in that notice.
Would that mean if we were contemplating rezoning this, I mean this is a kind of a perhaps an area in change, wouldn't it be if nothing else good manners to involve them or talk about this with the city of Madison Heights to develop a more comprehensive approach to this triangle of land?
Generally speaking, I mean, we could, but generally speaking, no. We don't get notice of what they're doing or have input from what they're doing or the surrounding communities. So no, we haven't had any direct correlation with them. There are properties over in this segment that are located in both Madison Heights and Royal Oak. When things occur on those properties, we have had conversations about whether or not they're going through plan review and building code review in Madison Heights or whether they're being done in Royal Oak, and that varies over in this location because there are a couple of properties there that span in both boundaries.
Thank you.
I just want to follow up, and well, let's go to Mr. Gantina first.
So I just had a quick question, Tim. You may or may not know the answer to this, but the properties in Madison Heights immediately adjacent to the east, do we know what that zoning designation is, understanding that it's maybe not a direct correlation to ours, but it may give us at least an idea of the zoning?
I don't recall. I don't have that information.
All right, Mr. Twing, I have a follow-up question. I don't know if I heard you right. Did you say for this particular request for rezoning, you did or did not put Madison Heights on notice?
I believe when we mail 300 feet out, I believe we send it to all the property owners.
So you would have sent it to the property owners in Madison Heights, despite the fact they're not Royal Oak citizens, they still would have had the opportunity to respond.
I believe so, yes. I'd have to go back and confirm, but I believe we do that on every case.
That would be your practice?
Yes. Even though we may not be required to.
All right. Any other questions for Mr. Twing? All right, so I jumped the gun before. So I'd like to invite the petitioner and counsel to introduce themselves to the record, and we'll give you a chance to make your presentation.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? My name is Rick Russell. I'm with Williams, Rattner, and Plunkett. I am representing the petitioner, MCF Properties. MCF Properties is made up of two great people with me here tonight, Lynn Breimer and Matthew Breimer. They are the ownership group for the property at 1600 North Stephenson Highway in the city of Royal Oak. We have been working with the city for some time in connection with this rezoning application, beginning with the city affording us some time to ask some questions of Mr. Twing and Mr. Murphy about the process as it relates to the rezoning application and the consideration of the intended repurpose of what is presently the use at 1600 North Stephenson Highway, and that, of course, is the Royal Oak Gym, which I'd like to get into in just a minute. I hope everyone has had a chance as part of the packet that you received to take a look at the letter that we wrote in connection with the rezoning application, and that letter is dated August 26, 2020, in which we try to lay out the background for why is it that we're here before you this evening? Why is this MCF Properties request rezoning of this property from neighborhood business to general business? How is that request consistent with the master plan and the development pattern in the area and the city's, of course, road infrastructure and other infrastructure items? And what are the surrounding uses? And why is it that we're having a struggle like other gym owners during this phase of our economy and in our phase of experiencing, like all business and individuals are going through right now, suffering as our constituents at the gym do through the COVID-19 experience. How is it impacting our business, and what is the opportunity for the city to repurpose this building and all the great infrastructure that surrounds it in an area of the city that was especially, I believe, favored by both the citizens, people in the public who commented, planning and other officials in connection with consideration of the city's marijuana retail and micro business ordinance. And so I'll dive in with that. If anybody has any questions, of course, obviously just feel free to interrupt me and I'll answer any questions. But the letter, we intended to be fairly detailed. We intended to address all the ordinance criteria as it relates to rezoning of the property pursuant to ordinance section, that would be 770-129A through H, or A through H. And all the different criteria that Mr. Twing references in his report are referenced in fairly great detail in our letter. What is the Royal Oak Gym? Well, the Royal Oak Gym, of course, is a strength training facility. It's a workout facility. It's a powerlifting facility. It's a facility for people that are very serious about their fitness. The business, like many other gyms, many other fitness facilities, many other workout facilities, has experienced a tremendous setback as a result of COVID-19. And it's also experiencing tremendous competition, as we presented to you in our market study attached as Exhibit C to our application. What is that caused us to consider when the city was passing its marijuana retail ordinance, which calls for properties only within the general business district or the general industrial district to be permitted to be used in connection with a marijuana retail facility. We were approached because we are in the right location, we contend. And the location, of course, is Stephenson Highway, surrounded by I-75, 12-mile, Campbell Road, and other major arterial network area. We have a facility that has 44 parking spaces, 13,000 square feet, and it was a desirable location per the criteria we felt were set forth, and obviously the potential purchaser of our property felt was appropriate after listening to the city consider where and where not marijuana facilities should be located. If you look at the development pattern around our property, it's all commercial. The master plan is commercial for this district. It's general commercial. The area surrounding us is all commercial or light industrial or municipal or government. There are no longer any neighborhood or residential uses in our general vicinity or adjacent to us in any respect. That changed in 2012. Previously, I think the neighborhood business district, which we currently are zoned, was there, we contend in our research, because of St. Denis Catholic Church campus. Both the school and the church were there. They had 17 acres. It was clearly a community residential neighborhood type use. And the surrounding commercial was zoned, including our site, was zoned neighborhood business. Though it allows many of the uses that are consistent with the general business district, there are some uses that are different. Even though the master plan calls for general commercial, we were still neighborhood. Well, in 2012, to the immediate west, the city rezoned St. Denis Catholic Church in connection with the sale of that property to a commercial PUD. Existing there now is no longer the Catholic school and campus, but a Kroger. Kroger PUD, complete with a restaurant, a bank, a fuel station, and gone are the last vestiges of any neighborhood character of the surrounding area. The surrounding area is, as I said, major arterial roads like I-75 and Stephenson. It is a master planned area, general commercial, and is master planned consistent with our zoning request and is developed that way. So it's zoned, master planned, and developed all of consistent with the general commercial character of what we're requesting. Now, we do have a land contract agreement to sell the property if the property is appropriately rezoned and appropriately licensed for the marijuana facility that we think the city has decided that it needs to welcome or desires to welcome into its borders. There's going to be a very limited number of licenses, but the city was clear that the location should be away from the downtown on Main Street and away from Woodward Avenue. There was public comment to that effect from Charles Simchina today in an email that was submitted to the city that I thought articulated that point very well. We are on the southeastern edge of the city, away from downtown and away from Woodward. But we are in a neighborhood, we are in a commercial district that is master planned for that use. We are in a neighborhood business district, but the neighborhood character of the area has ceased. And the general commercial area of the nature predominates, not just because of our use or of the surrounding area uses, but because of the major thoroughfares that exist to transport vehicles and persons in a way that's intended. And the facility we have with 44 parking spaces and 13,000 square feet couldn't be any more appropriate for this intended use. So this isn't a change in land use, in a sense. This is a change in degree of land use. So we We've been existing as business. We are zoned and master planned as that, and that's the development character of the surrounding area. What we're asking for is a modern increase to allow for the proposed marijuana retail establishment to go into this location at 1600 Stephenson Highway, or alternatively to widen the scope of potential uses so that the Royal Oak Gym, which obviously ownership is tremendously concerned about the future of from a business perspective, can realize a reasonable return on investment, which is one of the factors in your ordinance criteria. I'm almost finished. Taxable value. In exchange for the property being sold, the city can also realize the public service benefit of an uncapping event. And I remind the commissioners that in connection with any proposed reuse of the property, whether it be a marijuana retail business or any other use, you have site plan control. And if it's a marijuana retail business in a general business district, as we request, the city commission will also have special land use approval process. So we're not asking for a license. We're not asking for, nor could we, we're not asking for a site plan or a special land use at this time. We're asking you to respectfully consider the merits of our rezoning application, which we think is tremendously strong as it meets all the ordinance criteria, which I'm going to spend about 10 seconds on in a minute, just because we spent so much time writing at length about each one of those elements in our letter dated August 26th. And this, of course, is your rezoning ordinance criteria that Mr. Twing cited in his staff report, and this is at section 770.129. Subsection A calls for the rezoning request to be consistent with the master plan. I believe that we've established that, as the questions that Mr. Casada was asking were, I thought, appropriate in that regard. The master plan designates this area for general commercial. Section B, the site's physical location is appropriate for this type of use. Well, again, we have 44 parking spaces. We have all the infrastructure, traffic networks, building size, location away from the city's main downtown and Woodward area, commercial corridors to accommodate this type of use, and the neighborhood character of the surrounding area has ceased. That was maybe present before the Catholic Church campus was sold and repurposed in 2012. Reasonable return on investment. I don't want to spend any more time on this than you may find necessary, though the applicants, of course, are here to answer any questions that they experience on the ground every day trying to operate a gym during a pandemic with increasingly intense commercial pressure from big box users, many of whom are going into and experiencing their own financial struggles and bankruptcies during this pandemic period. We are expected under this ordinance criteria to show that we can't receive a reasonable return on investment. What we're asking for you here today in this moderate request to uptick the zoning from neighborhood to general business affords us that opportunity and certainly increases the likelihood of this land use owner being able to receive a reasonable return on investment. The surrounding uses are compatible. I already went into surrounding detail in that section D. We are master planned, the road network is there, and the surrounding area is commercial and industrial. The street system, we talked about that, and that's at section E as an egg. Section F, the capacity of the public utilities. Again, we have a massive road network around us, including I-75, and there's no indication that the public service utilities wouldn't be able to service any facility being operated in a services of commercial use of the property now. An apparent demand at section G, as in great, at section 771.29G. The city recently passed an ordinance that allows for, if you're in a general commercial, or if you're in a general business or in a general industrial area, to ask the city for a license in connection with marijuana facilities, as long as it seems you're not in the downtown or you're not on Woodward, which we're not. So the city has expressed a demand by passing that recent ordinance. There's going to be a limited number of licenses. We have the perfect location. We are not a spot zone in connection with Exhibit H because we are a business use in a business master planned area in a business developed district with major business arterial roads surrounding us. There's no neighborhood use anymore of any type. We're nowhere near residences or schools or academic or religious institutions at this time. And we are merely asking for one small commercial degree higher than what we're currently not only zoned for, but operating as. And other criteria, certainly we're suggesting that environmental and traffic studies would be preliminary at this stage, since all we're asking for is a rezoning and no site plan is being presented at this time. We did provide a lengthy summary for you, but I'll read the last sentence of my letter, at least to this, to myself and on behalf of my client, MCF Properties, and with all the respect due to this commission and leaving time certainly for you to ask any questions of us, we find that the boxes are checked here in connection with good civic and public and private use land use practice in connection with this request. And we'd ask that you recommend to the City Commission that the property be rezoned from neighborhood business to general business in connection with our request.
All right. Thank you.
First in all the questions.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Rassel, and thank you, petitioners, for coming. That was a very thorough, lengthy explanation, and I think it covered a lot of the points and answered a lot of questions. I do have a few follow-up questions, though. However, maybe you can help, clarify, explain, or underscore. So, if I understand this correctly, the basis, the motivation behind the request really ties to a potential deal to sell the property that would require a different, zoning classification in order to permit the use of the contingent purchase order for the property. Is that my understanding? In this case, it would be.
You're correct, though. We've tried to establish in our letter today that there are reasons to rezone the property independent of that.
Yeah.
Yes, you're correct, Mr.
Right. And so
you're correct in your
the property is operating as Royal Oak Gym, correct?
Correct.
The interests that are purchasing it, are they completely independent, or would the owners have? Is the same owners have an interest in it, or is this just a complete sell to motivate the sell?
No, this is a independent purchaser and an operator of facilities that have been licensed and are operating in other local jurisdictions, and they're experienced and have passed muster in all due respect, or in all respects, with both the state and with the local governments in which they operate. But there's no financial or other affiliation between MCF and the new owners, other than what would be a land contract.
Okay.
To sell the building.
To sell the building and land, no business interest in the potential new business there. Okay. And perhaps the only other question, I know you mentioned, I appreciate the candor that, the business has been suffering, especially in light of COVID-19, and that's one of the motivators to sell, right?
Right.
And put along with other competition. And I imagine the business has been fully compliant with all the executive orders that have been put in place since the pandemic started. Is that true or false?
It's 100% correct, Mr. Mayor, and my clients and I anticipated that may arise during this discussion. Oakland County Health was out fairly recently and gave us a full bill of health in connection with, a clean bill of health in connection with all of our activities. And yes, we've been in compliance with all the governor's orders.
Since March or since April when they were first?
Yeah, I mean, we were fully closed for 4 months or 5, whenever there was very limited activity permitted for staff and training during a beginning period. And then of course, gyms very recently became available for the general membership under very strict circumstances, very strict regulations that not only govern gyms, but and I'm not exactly sure of the details with that, because Royal Oak Gym enforces its own policies to a greater degree with regard to mask wearing and distancing and cleanliness and sanitation.
Yeah, I just know I've received and field, and I appreciate you answering that question. I received dozens of complaints from folks in Madison Heights as well as Royal Oak about complying to, these standards. And, I may have gotten different information from the county in regards to compliance. So what I'll do is, I think we're getting a little bit outside of maybe the scope of conversation here, so I won't question you harder on that, but I appreciate you answering the question. So, okay. And yeah, all right. That's all I have for right now. Thank you, Mr. Casada.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the petitioner from the panel? Mr. Gontina, you're on mute. Mr. Gontina, there you go.
I have the same two-screen problem. So I just wanted to clarify one point, or a few points. I certainly appreciate the applicants being forthright in the proposed use if the rezoning were to be granted. I think it'd be very easy to come before this board, request a rezoning based on the other merits that had been laid out, and either choose to withhold or in some other way not disclose the ultimate intent to use the building. So I appreciate the forthrightness there. I did want to clarify, I answered my own question from before with, and I think it'd be good information for the rest of the group to have in terms of the zoning for the buildings that are in Madison Heights. I did just look it up on their zoning map. Everything adjacent to the east is in fact per a Madison Heights zoning zone, light industrial or general business. Question I have for the applicant though is the if the rezoning were to be granted and this new entity were to come in and establish, they were able to get a license and establish, is the intent to rehabilitate the existing structure that's there, or would the intent be to essentially take that structure out and replace it with something new?
That's an excellent question, and we don't know. We would be selling the property. It's likely, and from the information that we've been provided, the building would be used. Obviously, there may be renovations that would require site plan approval. In the general business district that we're requesting, there would also have to be a special land use approval connected. So the applicant today is not going to be the person asking for any renovations, any changes to the size of the building, the scope, the layout, or any of it. My guess is somebody would have to come in and do certainly re-sign and things like that, but we're not aware of any information. And this is step one, and then there's three major steps: licensing, site plan approval, and special land use approval that would have to be described in great detail and met to the city's satisfaction before any potential retail use for the sale of marijuana or any other use that the site could go forward. So the long-winded answer is we are not aware of a single change to the building, which is why we're not proposing any site plan changes at this time.
Thank you.
Other questions for the petitioner from Commissioner Douglas?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Rassel, I want to look at item C of the contingency here. It says, evidence should document the applicant cannot receive a reasonable return on investment through developing the property with one or more of the principal permitted and special land uses under the current zoning. I certainly appreciate the fact that running a gym in these COVID times is difficult, but the fact is that there are many other uses that this site could be put to, and I wondered what research you did to convince us that you cannot receive a reasonable return on this land using it with some other use.
Right. Well, I can answer the question in a couple of different ways. Thank you. As we wrote in our letter, and I'm sorry for referring to it here, current economic conditions coupled with the location of the site, surrounding land uses make it unlikely that other development options that would not be restricted by the current neighborhood business district would be economically viable. There are 2 gas stations located with 1 block of the site, numerous restaurants within 3 miles, and the city's outside the sites outside the city's primary retail and personal service corridors. So if you're not going to be using the facility for something like an office building, which isn't viable even in these market conditions and what didn't seem viable previously. There's a concentration of restaurants in the local area, service stations, light industrial, car dealerships, other banks all over the place. The market conditions that we've been advised by the broker that's represented us in connection with the request that was made to us to consider the sale of the property do not indicate that there's any market interest in any other reuse of this property. We bought the property in 2016 for the sole purpose of operating as the Royal Oak Gym, and that's been our experience to date. It's a good business. We've enjoyed running it, but it's on shaky legs. That's just the industry and many other businesses in industries that have been tremendously affected by the pandemic. And we were facing tremendous market conditions and concentration of big box retailers before that. So it's a very good question, but we do not believe that any potentially viable use in the neighborhood business district presents us the opportunity that's being afforded to us today. And so we ask you to consider that in connection with this request because this is an excellent opportunity for the city to allow a repurpose of this site and to realize the tax base increase from the uncapping of the property and to provide for a suitable location for one of the potential licensees that are inevitable in the city with regard to the marijuana retail business. So this was an opportunity that's presented to it. We think the market, especially when there's an active real estate professionals involved, the market reacts to the demand. And the demand is evident by the city passing its ordinance and us being approached by the potential user.
A further question. Can I assume that the sale offer is contingent upon getting the rezoning and getting a marijuana license?
You're absolutely correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions for the petitioner? All right, I don't see any hands, so I will bring it back before the panel here for discussion or a motion. Do we have any comments from the commission? Yes, Mayor Fournier.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what my colleagues think. I'm struggling here for a couple reasons. One, and I think some good points were made with, speaking to our neighbors, Madison Heights. I know typically we don't, talk to them about, more simple issues, but given the fact that this has a, what could be considered a more emotional issue tied to the marijuana. I mean, we saw, as Mr. Rassel pointed out, with the discussion about our ordinance, I would like to correct him. It's not that everyone said we didn't want anything on Woodward. We did have some people call in that were misinformed on a lot of the facts and were really confused and a lot by somebody that actually has commented on this particular topic, incited a lot of confusion. So, for us, we were open to the general business concept. And so there's a little reluctancy there, to say, hey, unless we've spoken to Madison Heights, do we really take action at this point, just as a courtesy? Because we would hope they would do the same for us as intercity relationship with something like this. I mean, in general, maybe it's small things, but something like this could be a trigger item in their community. And to the extent that we can discuss with them and get their thoughts about what they plan to do in that area, I think would be helpful. It's a little challenging too in these cases. I know we've done a lot of PUDs in the past, without seeing the direct, and this is just because of the nature of the ordinance and everything. But one thing that kind of, this is again what I want my colleagues hopefully to shed some light on, because I'm not totally sold one way or the other. But typically we can see like a proposal that comes in and says, yep, I need to change this zoning. And this is exactly what you're going to get. This is the type of business. These are the owners. This is a little bit, I don't want to say cart before the horse, but, I mean, the arguments have been given about like, hey, this area is general business. I get it. But, without knowing that specific thing to actually, change the status quo is, challenging for me to wrap my head around. And I think maybe the only other thing is, well, I appreciate that a lot of businesses have been suffering during the pandemic. Probably everyone's business here at this table for sure. What is the hardship in the ROI? I mean, the building was purchased with the intent to be neighborhood business. That was a business decision. Yes, there's lots of banks and to me, some banks are profitable, some could go in there. There's always competition, to say that you don't have an ROI because you have a competitor. I mean, look at McDonald's and Burger King. They're always operating right next door to each other. So that's a tough litmus test to really move and change the ROI. I definitely appreciate the motivation, though, and the understanding, and there's been some fair arguments put forward about, the general area and that, this would be a place for a cannabis facility and the decisions about the highways and everything like that. I get that. I just struggle with those aforementioned issues. I mean, we always want to help a business out, but if this is just, flipping land, I don't want to say speculative because I don't believe anybody would have known in 2016 we'd be moving down this path, but it's hard to fully understand the hardship in the ROI that's permanent, not temporary, tied to the zoning. So I'd be interested to hear what my colleagues say. Like I said, I'm not fixed on any one of these points. I just, this is why we have a committee, because I'm eager to listen and learn.
Other comments? Thank you, Mr. Mayor. All right, I think Commissioner Douglas had her hand up first.
Thank you, Mr. Casada. Royal Oak's master plan is now 20 years old. And there are areas in the city which haven't changed much, but certainly this area of Royal Oak and adjacent Madison Heights has changed quite a bit with the addition of big box stores on the other side of I-75, the addition of the Kroger store. To me, this is an area that when we update our master plan, when we go through a master planning process, we want to take a much closer look at this area, because I think there are treatments, there are zoning and plans that we could put in place there that would even more enhance the value of all of the properties there. Certainly when communities begin a master planning process, they invite their neighboring communities, they notify their neighboring communities. And in a spirit of regionalism, I would think that we would definitely want to coordinate the planning for this triangle with the city of Madison Heights. So I'm kind of reluctant to make changes without some sort of comprehensive overview. The petitioner has made a case that this is not spot zoning, but it is. I mean, the fact is that all of the businesses around it would remain the same, and we might very well find ourselves as a planning commission facing a set of dominoes tumbling as other adjacent businesses come to us with requests for rezoning. And I think that's inconsistent with the comprehensive view that we as a planning commission want to take. But I particularly look to item G. There should be an apparent demand in the city for the types of potential uses in the requested zone in relation to the amount of land in the city currently zoned and available to accommodate the demand. I speak now as a city commissioner, and in our decision-making regarding the locations of marijuana establishments, we agreed that general business and industrial categories were A, suited for those establishments, and B, sufficient to meet the demand or our ability to, or our desire to accommodate the number of businesses that we wanted to accommodate. That is, our ordinance clearly says we are not immediately making every property in the city easily accessible to a marijuana business. So, I mean, I specifically feel like this application is not consistent with items G and H of the conditions in the ordinance, and so I will not be supporting this motion or this action.
Mr. Gantina had his hand up.
So I just wanted to comment on this particular area. I think is particularly well suited for this type of use. However, that's not what's before us today. What's before us today is a rezoning to a general business designation with full stop, without any particular use in mind. I appreciate the applicant's explanation of how the ROI on that property has been struggling. We've had some obviously very unique times recently, but that doesn't preclude other uses of the property that could potentially return ROI. I know they've gone through some other uses that are challenging as well. But at the same token, I have to kind of go back to what's before us today, and it's the reasoning behind the changing of the zoning. I struggle with it as well. I'm not sure that we're at a point yet where what's being put in front of us meets the merits to grant the zoning change. I certainly agree with the fact that because of its uniqueness and its adjacency to another municipality, just by simple good practice, we should absolutely confer with them to make sure that we have a good understanding of any concerns that they may have, any long-term future land use plans that they may have for their adjacent properties. At this stage, I don't know that the case has been made on the simple merits of a zone change to general business. The comments about its use notwithstanding, I'm not sure we've met the merits of that just yet. To say that if it came back before us with different information, that a different decision or a different opinion from me would be different at that time. But as of right now, what's in front of us, I'm not sure I can support.
The comments? Thank you, Mr. Gantina. Ms. Beakey?
As far as the concept of going from neighborhood business to general business and putting aside the rest of the information that was provided, which again, I do appreciate the clarification. Because of that location and being next to light industrial general business on the Madison Heights side, I might be inclined, only looking at the issue of general business, to move in that direction. And similarly, I personally was looking at the industrial zones as the ones most appropriate for marijuana use, but I think the point is well made that, again, we have to look just at the transition from neighborhood to general business at this stage in the game. I wouldn't be fully opposed to it. I'm kind of on the fence in terms of that goes, but as far as that goes, but similarly, because we have not updated our master plan and looked at some of these areas more specifically, that would give me pause. And again, if I were to say that I would support general business, but that if general business were to help this business by opening up a larger panorama of other types of uses, that would help, I would be more inclined to that. But you're saying that only the marijuana would be useful and not the rest of the list. So therefore that makes it very specific rather than just a shift from neighborhood to general, in my opinion.
Thank you, Ms. Beakey. The petitioner would like to say something, so I'll recognize the petitioner.
Thank you. In connection with a couple of the comments, which we appreciate very much, and thinking about the process here, we have a situation where the process, we're in a zone that is commercial, but in order to qualify for the use that we're hoping to establish through sale in the city, we have to uptick one district. We know that. Before the applicant can apply for a license, that must happen, and before a site plan can be applied for, or before a special land use. So this is really step one. So we have to go this route in connection with the request. We wanted to make sure that we didn't put the cart before the horse in any respect and ask for licenses or special land uses when the underlying zoning was inappropriate. In fact, the city won't consider a license application until the underlying zoning's been afforded. So understanding that people may have different opinions about where an appropriate use for a marijuana retail business may be in Royal Oak someday, we intended to try to listen to what we thought was some of the prevailing comment in that regard. I will say, and so our attempt here today is in good faith to try to start at the beginning of the process, which is the rezoning request for this body. I will tell you that in meeting with my clients in connection with reviewing the staff report, in this case, in which Mr. Twing appropriately calls out that we have asked for a general rezone without conditions, that this applicant, of course, would consider limiting the proposed use by an agreed upon condition under the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act to just the proposed reuse of the property, which would eliminate the potential specter of other general business uses being provided if the marijuana user fell through. We're looking to do this in connection with cooperation with the Planning Commission, and in light of your comments here today, it may be appropriate to suggest to the Commission that we be approved with a condition, which we'd be willing to offer. That our rezoning be subject only to the prospective marijuana retail business.
Right. Thank you. Any comments? Any more comments from our side of the table? All right. I don't see any hands, so I'll go. All right. Here's my feeling is I'm going to echo something that's been said. I definitely prefer a project. I would definitely prefer that petitioner showed up with a plan and asked for conditional rezoning so we knew what we were getting. But this process is available to ask for simply a rezoning, a flat out rezoning. They paid their fee, they made their application, they put their presentation together, and they presented it to us. So I think we need to look at the criteria and make a decision on that basis. I think that the marijuana issue is intriguing because, quite frankly, I think that of the places that I've seen proposed, and I haven't seen all the places that have been proposed, and the places I've seen proposed, this looks to me like the most appropriate one I've seen for this sort of business. I do have a couple questions for Mr. Twing, if I may. I noticed on the website that the marijuana ordinance 2020-06 was passed on July 27th. That's what it says on the website. Hasn't been incorporated yet. Were the zoning amendments 2020-07, were those passed?
Yes.
Okay, so those are now part of our consideration. Okay, good. Next question, St. Vincent de Paul. It's a retail store, but it's run by the Catholic Church. Is that considered a religious facility for purposes of the zoning amendment?
Without a little more detail, it really doesn't matter. We have no requirements for distances from churches, or it's only K-12 schools.
Okay, thanks. Good clarification.
And if I may, does everyone on the Planning Commission understand the process? I know there's been a lot of discussion of the marijuana provisions, and it's a little different. But does everybody understand the process that's going to have to go through? It's kind of which is the chicken and the egg first. You cannot apply for a license for marijuana facility in the city of Royal Oak unless your property is zoned general industrial or general business. The application that's being put together will just kick you out and tell you that your parcel is not eligible. You cannot apply for special land use approval, site plan approval under the zoning ordinance if you have not been given a license slot. So you can't do one without having the zoning in place first. And that's why I wanted to indicate very early on in the presentation is your real decision tonight is to ignore the request and any discussion on marijuana and simply decide whether this location and the locations around it might be appropriate for general business zoning. If you feel that that's the case, then you should recommend that it should be rezoned to general business. If it's rezoned and the petitioner doesn't get a license, there won't be a marijuana facility here in the foreseeable future. They won't be able to apply for special land use or site plan approval. So the steps that are going to occur are you have to have the appropriate zoning before you can apply. You can't apply for the other unless you've been awarded a license slot. And I think that's why the petitioner is attempting to go this route, is they would like to be eligible to apply for the license they've made an argument for why this location should be general business. But I would go back to the planning commission members and say, your real decision here is this location appropriate for general business? And if it is, perhaps you would direct staff to look at the other surrounding neighborhood business and evaluate whether all of those should also be changed, and bring those forth to you at a future meeting, to get into the discussion of, has the area changed significantly enough to change that neighborhood business? But I just don't want everyone to get lost in the weeds of the request for a marijuana facility here because of the way the two ordinances, the licensing ordinance and the zoning ordinance, interplay. One won't let the other happen until the other one has happened.
Thank you, Tim.
Just for clarity, we will not take an application for a PUD and or a conditional rezoning for marijuana that hasn't been given a license slot. You can't get a license slot without being zoned in general business or general industrial.
All right, thank you. And Mayor Fournier had a question.
Yeah, and I think those are fair points, Tim. The only thing that I would add is that, well, now the difference from going from neighborhood to general business is that a marijuana establishment is on that list now for general business. So, you know.
That is correct.
Yeah, so although we can't necessarily, you know, think about the future criteria of this particular property, still, you know, in my opinion, discussing with Madison Heights that we're thinking about changing something in light of that we recently just changed. I mean, literally, we approved the second reading last night that, you know, going from neighborhood to general business, our general business districts are going to look different. You know, might merit a conversation with the city of Madison Heights and with the overall, as Commissioner Douglas said, you know, look and feel of all the properties in that area, both with Madison Heights and Royal Oak. I think that's a fair suggestion that was brought up. But, you know, I just wanted to say you're right, and thank you for clarifying.
All right. Another comment. There we go, Mr. Klooster.
Yeah, so I would echo some of the other commissioners' comments in regards to review item C in determining that it would be difficult to observe a reasonable return on investment without the rezoning. With that in mind, I'm finding it more, or I would say a stronger sway to look at, is this area appropriate for the general business zoning? We generally have 4 commercial zones, from office through neighborhood down to general business, with general business being the least restrictive of those commercial zones. In this area, I think it warrants the least restrictive commercial zoning available, consistent with our current master plan, as a general commercial area adjacent to industrial areas. Adding a layer of restriction to this commercial area, I think is not necessary. I agree with some of the other comments regarding spot zoning and those types of things, and I kind of touch on Mr. Twing's comments regarding examining this entire area for potential rezoning as a more appropriate use or future land use for this specific area of the city. What I become most concerned about with a blanket rezoning are the uses that are allowed by right. Looking through that list of uses that are allowed by right, I see no objectionable uses for this specific area. Anything that would require a closer look is a special land use and would require specific examination through a special land use application. With that being said, for tonight's proposal, I am in support of rezoning this to general business and directing staff to examine this string of 5, 6, 7 properties along the east side of Stephenson there that are relatively unique and potentially warrant rezoning.
Thank you, Mr. Klooster. Other comments? I have a couple more, if you don't mind. I think that the master plan already has spoken to what Mr. Klooster just talked about. The master plan has this as what they call general commercial, and it's already, that's already the future land use. Now, what's there now? If you go out there and you look on even both sides of the border there, every single use in that area on that side of the road is a general business use. There's a gym, that's general business. There's an office, that's a general business. There's a switching station, that's general business. There's 2 retail stores, those are general business. There's an auto service station, that's a general business. On the Madison Heights side, there's a party store, that's general business. There's, I was surprised to see this, a pole dancing fitness service center. Yeah, I guess you get fit by doing pole dancing, and another auto service center. And there's also Modern Skate and Surf, which is an indoor recreation area. Every single one of those uses that surrounds this property is already general business under our code, if we applied our code. And I think after studying the master plan and studying the differences between the 2 types of zones, general commercial and general business, I think they're similar. I think the intention was that this area would be general commercial. That's what the master plan says, which translates to me for general business. I don't see any reason why we would go back to a more restricted use, to echo Mr. Klooster. What you'd be doing if you didn't rezone this area as intended by the master plan, you'd be trying to pull this back to a more neighborly, sort of a neighborhood business, but there's no neighborhood there. There's a freeway, there's a couple of major streets, Kroger, like I said. So I think that despite the fact the petitioner cannot meet all the criteria, our job is to look at all the criteria, consider it, and make the decision whether there should be general business. So I'm going to quickly go down them. A, consistent with the goals and policies of the master plan, it meets that. B, physical, geological, environmental features, is it compatible with the permitted uses? Yes. C, can there be a reasonable return on investment? Of course it can. It can't meet that one. D, potential uses are compatible with surrounding uses? Yes, we just went through that. Street system capable of accommodating? Yes. Capacity of public utilities? I suppose there's a question there. What kind of marijuana facility? But if it's going to be retail, certainly yes, or whatever they're going to have. Apparent demand? Well, Commissioner Douglas makes a good point that the City Commission made some decisions there, but I think this is such a good spot for general commercial. I think that the demand, while it's not unique to the city, it's a good spot for that. And then not create a spot zone. Again, the master plan says this is where we're going. And other criteria, I have to say that I understand the hesitation of the City Commission members to say, if we do this and we don't tell Madison Heights and it ends up being a marijuana retail, there could be some issues there. I agree that's a concern, but on balance, I'm supporting this request. I think it makes sense. Any other comments? Mr. Twing?
I just wanted to remind you that we still need to open the public hearing and listen to the one public comment that was called in. I believe it was only one, but
Sorry about that.
Need to do that.
Let's please do that. Please proceed.
Carol, I guess we're ready for the...
Okay, yeah, let me just get to it now. Gosh. Sorry, I had it all queued up.
This is Charles Simchina. I'm calling about the 1600 North Stephenson rezoning. I'm in support of that rezoning. So are many of our neighbors close to Woodward Avenue. The consensus from my neighborhood, which is far away from Stephenson, but is affected by your recent amendments to the marijuana zoning ordinance, is that you should revisit the marijuana ordinance and eliminate zoning for marijuana stores on Woodward. Use some clever and interesting techniques in order to allow good locations like North Stephenson to more easily obtain a site plan approval that's zoned properly for a marijuana store. The biggest problem that I see is that the public has been disenfranchised along the way. There's really no effort made to engage the public before major changes in rezonings are discussed at the Planning Commission level. That happened with the marijuana ordinance, and that's why there was so much opposition when it finally got to the City Commission level, and they were told that too late. We've been working on this for a while. Well, it's not too late if you engage the public and also do some independent studies for parking, traffic, and community impact. We've been marching through the city for the last 3 or 4 years and rezoning properties all over the city. The Woodward stretch is the most recent one with marijuana. And we all know that you are discussing and have pending changes for multifamily high-rises to be on Woodward Avenue with minimal setbacks and insufficient parking. We know that a couple of weeks ago you discussed diluting the adult business ordinance, which is one of the few protections these adjoining neighborhoods have. You're causing lots of distrust between our residents and our elected officials and government by not taking a process under your belt and having task force like Tim Twing mentioned 2 weeks ago, or town hall meetings to get input from people. You'd be surprised. A lot of people would support marijuana stores, such as the one on Stephenson, if you would ask and you would do something to encourage their participation. You need that participation, and you need foundational data and information through independent studies to help guide you. We shouldn't be doing this on whims and on personal opinions from a small number of people. The zoning changes are dramatic. They affect, just on Woodward alone, there's almost 5,000 homes within walking distance of Woodward. And none of those people have been notified, have been engaged, or their opinions been asked. When you did the marijuana ordinance, only 7 people showed up for a public hearing because no one knew about it. They were all from the marijuana industry. Don't do anything else on Woodward Avenue without.
All right. Any other of those, Tim?
I believe that's the only one.
For the record, that should have been a non-agenda item because 95% of that was non-agenda issues, but I guess we'll have to deal with that in some other day. All right. So any other questions for the petition? Yes, Commissioner Douglas.
No, not so much a question as a comment. I continue to feel that this proposal does not meet items C and H of our conditions. Item C says the evidence should document the applicant cannot receive a reasonable return on investment through its current zoning, that is neighborhood business. I am not convinced that switching it to general business, marijuana aside, just switching it to general business and any of the other general business uses that would then be allowed on this site is going to make this property economically viable. I think that the conditions that affect it are the size of the building, adjacent uses, and that the only thing that will make this viable is a marijuana license, not the fact that it's general business rather than neighborhood business. And I continue to say that this is spot zoning. Whether or not the rezoning is consistent with what's going on in that neighborhood doesn't take away the fact that it is spot zoning. And irrespective of these, but just in general, I hesitate to see us accommodate this rezoning and see a flood of rezoning requests from neighborhood businesses across the city of Royal Oak wanting to be zoned general business so that they too can pursue marijuana licenses. But I understand that feeling is not really relevant to our decision. Our decision needs to be based on the conditions that the ordinance describes. And for those reasons, I do not support this motion. And in fact, I'm going to introduce a motion to deny the rezoning.
Is there a second?
I'll second the motion for discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is there a
For
second?
discussion.
Or discussion? Well, I'll have a quick comment right off the bat. No, I agree. C, they cannot meet C. But I don't think that's, myself, I don't think that's dispositive. It's something we have to consider. And I would tell you that if any one of these businesses showed up here and made the presentation we heard tonight of marijuana or no marijuana, I would support it because that's the direction this is going. It's already there. And by the way, of course, we all know that we get these projects, and I think we get these projects before us, we approve them and they never happen. A financial issue comes up or some other issue. There's no guarantee this will be a marijuana business, but I think the rezoning is appropriate. Mr. Mayor.
I think the individual that called in made the point that with other considerations in the past and zoning and things that, you know, may or may not relate to this, that there were only like 7 people that called in to public comment, and that whenever we make changes to zoning, we should have, you know, a lot more public input. And I believe that point resonates a little bit relevant here for the fact that we haven't contacted the city of Madison Heights. This is a spot zoning. I do agree with Commissioner Douglas and Mr. Klooster on that point. I get the argument, but you know, if we really want public input and even according to the folks that, or the individual that called in, does it make sense to do a, you know, through the master plan process or through a more
I'll tell you why.
process that encompasses the entire look here and feel for the area to do it right? So my issue is, you know, while I appreciate, you know, where the petitioner's coming from, you know, the threshold to change the zoning, the hardships and ROI, you know, not paying attention to any individual use on this area, you know, I think is a tall order to achieve. And then you couple that with the fact that it appears that we haven't had a lot of citizen input. I mean, with our marijuana ordinance, we had 22 meetings, you know, and lots of people, and that seemed not to be enough. And so I think that it behooves us to look at this more comprehensively before making a decision and showing implicit bias in one way or the other. That's just my thought.
Ms. Beakey.
Listening to the call in, as well as listening to some of the comments through the discussions on the marijuana ordinance when it was at the Planning Commission. I was not involved in the ones at the City Commission. In reflecting on some of the different kinds of comments we get on various things that come before us, I think we have to think about collectively and more broadly in the city, how we're communicating with citizens and what are the touch points at which we have input from citizens, because we rely very heavily on these public meetings. And I think that we have to think about, as a city, our diversification on our communication techniques. And also, and I've mentioned this in other discussions, when we think about our neighborhood businesses and our general business and people who live in proximity to those business areas, what are the mechanisms by which we, on some kind of ongoing basis, whether it's every couple of years, as there are businesses changing over, having discussions with people who live in those neighborhoods about that business district, because their input should be sought in some way. We have some neighborhood associations, we have different mechanisms. And so I just think that's a general topic that I think needs to be addressed overall, because it comes up in these different ways. But when it just comes up on one site like this, it makes it more complicated. And it feels too sporadic, and it should be more systematic in some way. And maybe doing the addressing the master plan, having that being done is one part of it. But I think there may be some other things that could be done to help in that process. That's one thing I just wanted to state in general, having heard these things. Regarding this particular property in that particular area and the process we've now put in place as far as getting a marijuana business in place, two things. Number one, I'm inclined to allow this to go forward because that's the process we put in place in terms to even look for these special land uses, et cetera. And number two, similar to other comments that were made, that particular area, in my opinion, also seems reasonable to open to a more general business use based on the surrounding businesses and based on the lack of surrounding residences at this time. However, if it is a concern on our part that that would be a spot zoning, I think we should look at considering this case into the context of that area in general. And again, that might create a process that's a little bit longer, but look at some of the surrounding properties at the same time. I personally would be okay moving forward on this general business designation to allow these people to proceed with that process and see if they could prove the merits of having the business they would hope to have there. And if we'd want to make it revert back to neighborhood business if they were not successful in a process that would engage more notification of surrounding neighbors, I understand the marijuana licensing is much more stringent, as is when you get special use site plan, there's more notifications that go out. So I wouldn't be so concerned with this particular looking like a spot use, except for the domino effect factor. So that's where, again, if it would be more conservative or more respectful to look at a few more businesses in the area, the idea that it would be general business to me makes a reasonable amount of sense. But again, I listened to some of those other concerns that people have and understand that we would not want everybody in different neighborhood businesses. This particular area to me doesn't seem like a neighborhood business even as it is now. And so that's why I'd be more inclined to go with general business. And if the adjacent properties need to be evaluated as well, I'd be open to that.
Thank you, Ms. Beakey. Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, and I think the only thing that, we have to be cognizant of, and maybe I've beaten around the bush a little bit, but Commissioner Douglas made a reference to it about, the challenge that we're going to have, and we saw this similarly with the electronic sign ordinance, right? I mean, this isn't really much different than the digital billboard signs, not billboard, but messaging signs. If we don't look at this, and we did look at it in the context of marijuana, which is outside this, we looked at it comprehensively, all the spots in the city, and there's a lot of input and feedback, and where the zones were. And we elected not to change certain zones or do certain things. But when it comes to, zoning and the motivation to move, I mean, I understand the motivation is, if all the other areas there are commercial, okay, but we're still ultimately doing the spot zoning for an individual petitioner that is looking for a specific use ultimately, even though it's not part of my criteria, it's there in the packet. And so do we have to be careful to ensure that, we're fair for the next individual that petitions us in another part of the city that may be neighborhood business, and how do we treat them, fairly? How do we make that case not just to the public, but to a potential, judge to say, okay, well, you changed the neighborhood zoning over here in a spot zone, and then now the next petitioner that wants to move in on Catalpa or wherever, yeah, we can list all the criteria, but we're not meeting 100% of the criteria, right? And there are some criterias there that are coming up short. So I think, as much as I understand the pros and cons, I think we want to be careful and make sure if we're going to make a change like this, it probably should be done in a bigger context and not in spot zoning, not necessarily for this individual case, but I fear for the cases and how it affects our decisions coming down the road for other, and we know there will be lots of others depending on how we decide here and how we handle those in a fair and equitable way and what that means from, litigious perspective. So I think, my head is, we got to look at this as a neighborhood, get some input, go through the process. And if the change makes sense, you know, at a macro level, good, then everything's fine. But if we do it on a spot basis, I worry that that's going to open up a can of worms that we can't, you know, that opens us up to a lot of unnecessary issues.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Gantina.
So I just want to say I really am appreciative of the discussions in general, because oftentimes it helps provide you, a context to your thoughts that are different than what you originally come in with. And I think for me in this instance, much of the discussion has swayed my opinion with some caveats. I do believe that the ROI issue, that they aren't satisfying that. However, I don't think that our decision should be based on that single issue. I think some of the path that we should go down has already been written for us, in the sense that general commercial is in the future land use already. I appreciate the discussion around the existing uses surrounding this site that we're talking about are already kind of a general business use or a general commercial use. I am concerned about and would want to get input and feedback, at least be able to give Madison Heights the opportunity to levy an opinion. Mr. Kluser brought up some good points around, if the neighborhood is changing, I understand that we don't necessarily want to, change for change's sake in terms of the zoning. But if the climate and the tenor of the neighborhood is changing to where this zoning doesn't necessarily serve the needs of the area, and I think that's maybe evidenced by our decision to already call that out in the future land use plan as general commercial, then maybe this is the appropriate time to make that change for this particular site. But again, with the context of, I think we absolutely have to look at all the adjacent sites as well, and to make that similar change. Because again, if we look at that future land use as our guide, it helps alleviate the spot zoning issue a little bit, because ultimately at the end of the day, it would be a spot zoning if we're not doing the whole area. But if we are considering doing the whole area, and ultimately that is something that happens that kind of makes that issue go away. So I'm not, I guess my opinion has changed in terms of whether this rezone request should be granted or not. But again, it is in the context of a much larger issue, in the sense that I think we need to look at the whole area. I think we need to engage the neighboring city. And there's nothing that tells us that it absolutely would become the intended use as was stated in the packet. So I think we need to look at it from the perspective of, if we've already stated that general commercial is sort of what we want to happen in that area, it seems well suited for that use. The area has changed over time. I guess, my opinion has changed, but I guess I'm interested in a little bit more discussion as to how we can approach this, and incorporating some of those other issues with City of Madison Heights, spot zoning, and that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Gantina. Other comments? All right. Hearing none, I think it's time to call for the vote, if there are no other questions or comments. Hearing none, I'm going to call for the vote. This is on Commissioner Douglas made a motion to deny the request, and was seconded by Mayor Fournier. So that's what's on the table. Mayor Fournier.
Yes.
Commissioner Douglas.
Yes.
Ms. Beakey.
No.
Mr. Klooster.
No.
Mr. Gantina.
No.
And I am a no. So the motion is not passed, 4-2. Is there another motion?
Motion to approve the rezoning.
There's second. One for a second for that, if there is one, for that motion. All right, I don't hear a second. I don't think the chair can second. Is that right, Mr. Liss?
That's correct. Well, hold on one second.
No, I'm testing you. Sorry, I didn't study enough before it showing up.
Give me just a second. I'll be right with you, Mr. Chair.
Well, he's looking that up. The motion's to recommend approval to the commission for the reasons you previously stated, Eric, just for, I'm writing them down.
Correct.
Is that right?
Correct.
Just a little chatter while we're waiting. Your motion did not, I guess we're doing some discussion. Your motion did not include direction to the department to look at the entire section there? Or would that have to be a separate motion? Let me ask Tim that.
I think it could be a separate motion. I don't think you want to muddy this recommendation with a recommendation to do something else.
That seems sensible. Thank you.
I can second and open for discussion as we did on the last one, if that's appropriate, because I wanted to make a comment. If we go to a vote, I wanted to make a comment anyway, or should I wait till we hear?
Ms. Beakey, you're entitled to make as many comments as you raise your hand. So,
if you want a second, go ahead.
Well, here's the thing: is I'm inclined to second to move this along, if that we're going to do some of the other things we talked about that Mr. Contino was just mentioning, to look at the broader area, if there's others that are appropriate, and to make sure that we get the appropriate input from surrounding entities and businesses. Again, similar to when we discussed the rezoning of the businesses that were contiguous to the downtown, and we were considering general business to I forget the exact phrasing, mixed use, that we make sure we cover the bases with the surrounding businesses, but perhaps that would be in a different motion. So that was a comment, not a second.
well, you have clarification there, Ms. Beakey. You're seconding or for discussion, or you're not, for purposes of discussion, you're not seconding?
I think I'm not seconding. I'll wait and see if you do.
Well, I gotta find out if I'm allowed. There was a paper put out before us about simplifying the rules of order for a small body like this, in which the chair could have made motions, but I don't think we ever adopted that. In fact, I know we didn't, so I have to turn to Mr. Liss.
Mr. Chairman, the Plan Commission does have, I believe, rules of order where they have adopted the same Roberts rules that the City Commission has. And I've been looking into the Roberts rules. I don't believe the chair has the ability to support a motion, second the motion, but I do recommend that this motion be taken up simply for the fact that the no vote, the Ms. Douglas's proposal to deny the request was denied. So it's basically still an open question.
Thank you, Mr. Liss. I don't think we can make people second though, and if they don't,
no, you can't. You can't.
What else is in your little Roberts book there that was the next step?
Well, the motion fails, and you go on. The motion fails, and you go on.
Oh, thank you. Well, we didn't have a second, and comment by the mayor.
Yeah, it sounds to me that there's some, discussion about, involving, and this was going to be my comment, if this motion came forward, then if we approved it, then basically there's no more discussion. There's no more opportunity to, like, what's the point of involving the community or going out and evaluating anything, because that input is moot because you've already made the decision on this particular property. I would definitely support something if folks wanted to go back and take a look and, get some additional information to take a look at, and then, better inform what we should do for this particular area. If that's involving the city of Madison Heights, if that's doing whatever, it seems to me that would be, based on some of the concerns that I heard, a more reasonable approach, so you're not necessarily denying or, accepting. You're just saying, hey, look, we want more information from the public through some other process, and we can define what that process is, or we can, get a recommendation back and evaluate it. So, that's a sort of a third alternative as well, because I heard some concerns about that.
If I can, again, this is a recommendation to the city commission. You're not approving it and making a final decision on it this evening. It's a recommendation to the city commission, either to grant it to general business, not grant it to general business, with whatever else you want to throw into it. But the final decision isn't made this evening. Whatever you recommend will go up to the city commission. The city commission will have to hold 2 readings of the ordinance change if they wanted to move it forward for an approval. You could recommend approval and the city commission could reject it. You could recommend denial and the city commission could approve it. So I just want to be clear, it's not a motion to approve or deny this evening.
That's fine. You're right, Mr. Twing. It is a motion, but at the same time, I believe this body takes its work seriously. And if it is going to put forward a recommendation, I think that they would want to, make sure that their recommendation is, one way or the other conclusive, and not just, well, we'll kick it down to the commission without doing a proper evaluation.
I have a question for Mr. Twing. I may get confused there. So you said that if we did not recommend it, the city commission could still approve it? How did, just so I know, how would it get in front of the city commission if we don't make a recommendation?
Unless the petitioner withdrew it, you're recommending to the city commission that it be denied. We would forward that recommendation to the city commission with your reasons for the denial, and the city commission would have to act on it. And the city commission could thank you for your recommendation and choose to approve it. And then it would be held for a second reading.
So we would have recommended denial, and then they could have decided they didn't agree with us.
Yes.
I got you. But as we sit here at this moment, we've had a motion to deny, which failed. We have a motion to recommend approval, which didn't get a second. So what is the condition of this agenda item? Is it does it fail for lack of action? Is it tabled? Who has expertise in this area?
Commissioner Douglas had her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Commissioner Douglas?
Yeah, this, and I'll rephrase something that Mr. Twing said and expand on it. The petitioner has a right to an up or down vote here. And again, up or down doesn't mean we're approving. We are either recommending or not recommending to the city commission. But this needs to be a clean vote. Either we recommend it or we don't. We've agreed that we don't recommend it. So I can't understand why Mr. Gantina nor Ms. Beakey have seconded Mr. Klooster's very clear motion. And after we vote on that, there's an opportunity for further action to direct staff to further explore changes in this area based on what happened here tonight.
Thank you, Commissioner Douglas. Ms. Beakey.
Given all of that, I will second it to close this discussion. I was trying to be respectful of the comments that I was hearing based on the discussion. But if we want to just close this one issue, I will second Mr. Klooster's motion.
Okay, the motion for recommending approval of the rezoning has been seconded. Is there further discussion? Not, oh, there we go, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, I'll just add, I mean, it's weird because we do sit on the commission, so we'll have some extra time to look at this in a little bit more detail and maybe even have a chance to talk to our colleagues in Madison Heights ahead of time. So, but at this point, I want to, the way it was presented to me tonight, not because of the petitioner, and I won't even blame staff, but, it's certainly nobody's fault. I just need more information, and I think we should look at this as a planning commission a little bit more comprehensively. And until we do that, I wouldn't be able to recommend such changes in the area, just because of, some past experiences here. So it has nothing to do with the petitioner, but everything to do with maintaining the process that I try to hold to. So I won't be supporting it, but I just want the petitioner to know that.
Any other comments? Looking carefully, I don't see any. All right, I'd like to call for the vote on Mr. Klooster's motion. Mayor Fournier.
No.
Commissioner Douglas.
No.
Ms. Beakey.
Yes.
I'm sorry,
Yes.
Mr. Klooster.
Yes.
Mr. Gantina.
Yes.
And I'm a yes. So the motion passes 4-2. Congratulations to the petitioner. Thank you very much. Good luck to you.
Just one thing, appreciate all the time that was put in this evening. We look forward to working with the city, the staff, and the commission. We've been paying very close attention to the concerns that have been expressed this evening. We look forward to providing all the information and working through those concerns as we move on to the commission. We have been paying attention. Thank you very much for all your comments.
Thank you. All right. Very good. Next agenda item is the public hearing on the rezoning from neighborhood business to PUD on site plan 20-07-10. This is 803 North Main Street. We've seen this item before, but I think Mr. Twing should refresh us.
That's correct. You did see it at your July 14th meeting as far as a preliminary planned unit development. And the Planning Commission did approve it as a preliminary PUD. And you had some contingencies that you asked the petitioner to address. And they have addressed some of those, and I'll highlight those briefly. They did shift the building to the west, away from North Main Street. It's not a even setback as the roadway goes at an angle. As you see in the report, the north end of the building is some 7 feet off of the property line or the right-of-way, and the south end near Austin is about 4 feet off, of a setback. What that did also was take the west setback from what was on the original plan at 14 feet and moved it down to 10 feet. The site plan also now has 2 landscape areas, which was one of the items the Planning Commission asked the petitioner to do, was to come up with 10% of the site for landscaping. The site, as we indicated in the report, is a little bit over 7,600 square feet. And between those 2 landscaped areas, the one that I just mentioned along Main Street, as well as the one that's to the west of the building, they are meeting that 10% provision. They also, in the west landscaped area, put in a bioswale as part of the landscaped area, which is one of the items the Planning Commission did ask them to attempt to address. There were no changes to the driveway layouts out to Austin, but in terms of the discussion of safety issues, they proposed to install pedestrian warning devices at the sidewalk of each of those driveways. They also lowered the height of the building. It was previously 40 feet to the roof line. It's now 35 feet to the roof line. Based on the revised plan, they also modified the location for the waste and recycled containers. There are 2 locations for those now within the building envelope. It appears that those will have to be rolled out to the street in order to load them, but there was no particular method or procedure identified in maybe the petitioner can give you some heads up on that. Other than that, the other deviations, and I'll just touch on them real quick, that the Planning Commission dealt with at the last meeting were the triangle setbacks, the 10-foot setbacks at the driveway entrances, the building to height width ratio, the ground floor frontage being parking in neighborhood business, the maximum height I've already touched on, the driveway width, and then the maneuvering aisles that are within the first floor for the parking spaces are 18 feet, 10 inches for two-way movement. Generally, those would be required to be 20 feet under the dimensional requirements of the ordinance. So those are all the deviations that were part of the original approval, as well as a summary of what we've noticed as revisions that the petitioner put on the revised plan. As a PUD, again, it is a recommendation to the City Commission to either rezone a property under final PUD with whatever conditions the Planning Commission imposes. Part of your discussion tonight will be whether those revisions meet the standards that you are looking for from the preliminary PUD. That's all I have.
Thank you. I have a couple questions for you. You mentioned the 10-foot triangle. I looked at the ordinance and I looked at the drawing, figure 9, and I'm a little confused, so you're going to have to educate me. This part of the ordinance seems to deal with vehicular traffic, and the way it appears to me that the measurement goes is from the right-of-way inward, in which case I didn't see how the corner of Main Street in Austin was in violation. I went out there and measured it myself. It's like 16 feet to the building. Can you just clarify why this would need to be waived? I'm not sure that it's required. That's what I want to learn.
Well, the measurement is from the property line. So unless you were able to determine where the property line is, their setback to the building from the property line is 4 feet at Austin and North Main Street. That doesn't include the sidewalk. It's the actual right-of-way. So
where does the right-of-way start? I'm going to grab the screen again. I'm sorry, I'm not going to take too much time, but I'm trying to learn.
But generally, the right-of-way ends a foot inside the sidewalk. So all of the sidewalk would be.
Here's figure 9. Right. And it says, here's the street, and the measurement appears to be from the street. That's why I'm asking.
It's measured from the right-of-way, which is the part of the street.
All right.
So it's from the edge of the sidewalk, basically. If you look at,
here's the provision, and it talks about a vehicle, and so it's consistent that this should be measured from the street. I don't know if this is right or wrong. I'm just telling you this is what I'm reading.
Well, it's not from the paved travel lane. It's from the sidewalk in. So if you go,
well, that's a big difference. Yes, I think we might want to clarify this figure drawing, but that's for another day. So I'll stop there. All right. Very good. Is the petitioner here? Or any other questions for Mr. Plunkett, I should say? All right. Is the petitioner here?
The petitioner is here.
Could you introduce yourself and we'll give you a chance to make your presentation.
Sure. My name is Chris Long. I'm the architect for 803 North Main, and I believe Chris Brokevich is also on the Zoom call, basically. And I was going to address Mr. Twing's comments and your comments, Mr. Chairman, in order of those made. With respect to the triangle distance, I mean, clearly the graphic that you referred to in your presentation, we can't meet. The building is set back 4 feet at the south end and about 7 feet on the north end because the main goes off to the east. We know that. So just to be honest about it, we don't quite meet that. We did move the building back from the first presentation we made, now back, what, 2 months ago or a month and a half ago. That is a result of talking to DTE, which they're not exactly user-friendly. They do dictate what we can and can't do with respect to our building, but we did reach an accommodation which allows us to move the building back off the property line, off the North Main Street property line, back about 5 feet. So we have a 10-foot setback from their pole to the back of our building, which gave us the opportunity to, one, meet the landscape requirement, which is 10% of the lot area, and then two, meet what we talked about last time we met, which was to activate the corner, give some interest to the south corner of our building and Austin in Maine. I'd also point out, by the way, just as I'm thinking about it, that we do have a light at the corner of Maine and Austin. So that 10-foot triangular setback probably has a little less to do with the fact that we don't have that because we have a light there. So I think that is pedestrian friendly to our effort here to get a building built here. So we have met the landscape area, which is 10% of the lot area. It is in conflict, as you heard from Mr. Twing, with the 20-foot backup area aisle width for the 2 parking areas we do have. We felt it was more important to meet the 10% than it was to meet the exact 20 feet in the aisle width, since it is a private property. So we defaulted to the city with the respect to the landscaped area. We did add a bioswale, which was a discussion I know we had last time we met to make this a little more sustainable. So we have done that. It is landscaped, it is doable. And that leads me into the next issue, which is the driveway condition, which we have a 10-foot driveway coming out onto Austin from both of the parking areas. And that, I believe, and I believe the developer and builder believe as well, that that is more in character with the residential context of Austin. So the idea would be to keep it 10 feet. Obviously, it happens to work with our building elevation too, but it does eliminate additional land, additional paved area, which allows us to landscape. Keeps the context of the neighborhood, I think, as well. It's smaller, not 20 feet in width, it's 10 feet in width. I just believe it's better for the neighborhood. We did lower the building height. Above is defined by the ordinance as the top of the roof, but the whole idea would be to add a little bit more as a parapet to screen mechanical, which we would do anyway, but making it part of the building to screen the mechanical is better than having, I think, a mechanical screen that just kind of rings the top of the building. That is kind of an afterthought, not quite designed as part of the building, which we've endeavored to do. We did address the waste, which is both recyclables and waste on both sides of the building. Mind you, the building is divided into 2 parking areas by the entry lobby for the residential component. So we have waste and recyclables on both sides of the lobby, which would be rolled out on trash day. It's not intended, nor would it ever be intended to be a curbside situation. That's not good for us, not good for the neighborhood, certainly. I know we talked about, or Tim talked about the length to height ratio, which we're close on, and we don't anticipate any pole dancing fitness areas on the main level. So with that, I'd ask you to ask me questions, us questions.
Are there questions for the petitioner? Commissioner Douglas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very pleased that the developer took to heart the guidelines that we extended when they were last before us, reducing the height of the building, adding green space, which I suspect Ms. Beakey is cheering about. And interestingly, because I live a block west of this property, I walk by this all the time. And one day as I'm walking past, the adjacent neighbor stopped me, introduced himself to talk about this project, and expressed a concern about middle school children walking up that street towards Main Street as they used to do pre-COVID, and having their nose in their phone and being at risk as they pass those garage doors. So I'm very pleased to hear that that you have added warning signals by those doors, which is what I suggested to the neighbor that would be appropriate. I remain unhappy in general with frontage on streets with parking directly adjacent to the street. I know you've added some landscaping here, but I wondered if you would consider, instead of what you propose on the bottom level of the eastern facade, accepting from our Royal Oak Arts Commission the placement of some works of art on that part of the facade, which you would agree to host and maintain, with them choosing the materials. I mean, my interest is making sure that the street is walkable and of interest to pedestrians. And I realize that's you're not going to put retail in there, but it seems like art would add to that pedestrian experience. What would you say to that, Mr. Longe?
We would have no objection to that. It actually would encourage it.
Cool. Thank you.
Other questions for the petitioner? Ms. Beakey.
I appreciate the modifications that were made. Again, the landscaping, I appreciate. In terms of the presence in the neighborhood, the walkability and the safety along the sidewalk, which is Austin, I guess to me, I'm still a bit concerned that the building comes right up to the sidewalk. Oh, wait, which picture am I looking at? Building is right up to the sidewalk.
Yes, it is. Mm-hmm.
Right? And so I was wondering, would this project be feasible if it had fewer units and was stepped back from Austin more? Or some smaller units? I'm not sure about the architecture of that. Or is that an impossibility in this particular location? It still, to me, seems a little bit too big for that spot, given the houses along Austin and again, the walkability, the importance of that throughway.
I am probably not the best person to answer that question. I don't know if Chris can do that for me or with me.
It might not be feasible at this moment, but I just wondered if.
You there, Chris?
I'm sorry, do you have somebody who's able to answer that question, or is that a pass, Mr. Petitioner, Mr. Longe?
I was hoping the developer / builder was on the line, which I see his name on the Zoom call, but he is not.
Perhaps he needs to unmute himself.
There
yeah, I am here. I just couldn't figure out how to unmute that. Sorry. You know, the property has zoned not to have setbacks, really. So we were trying to, maximize the size of it. And we thought that was in keeping with what's going on down that street. Most of the properties on that street are, lot line to lot line. And so if we were to push it back, I don't know what would be acceptable, but if you were to push it back, like hypothetically 5 feet or something like that, I don't think it would be feasible for us to do a project like this, because the condos would be so small. we wouldn't be able to do it.
Well, you would lose units too, right?
Right.
That was the
Probably.
question.
Yeah.
And again, I'll make a comment. Just generally, I mean, when I look at that site and I look at the houses along Austin, and I recognize that there is the hair salon across the street that has a 5-foot setback of lawn on that side, and I acknowledge that, again, the older building from probably built in, I don't know, the 20s, 30s, 40s on Main Street is comes up to the sidewalk. But when I look at the house sitting there that's currently there and think about that site, in an ideal world, I would see that house incorporated into something that maybe would end up being 4 units on that site, because it would be more in keeping with, it would be more of a transition from those houses behind to what is currently on Main Street. And again, when we think about some of the buildings that were built up to the curbs or up to the sidewalks, excuse me, again, that's before we had speeding cars. That was when we had tramways. It was a different era. And so again, for the safety of those areas, which are our walk and bike zones, and of course the school being there, I would consider this one of them. I just would like to consider whether that would be feasible or not. So I appreciate your input on that.
You know, to address that further, the units presently we have designed are like 1,400 square feet. So pushing the building back would reduce them even further in square footage and reduce the parking, obviously. We're actually trying to hit a sweet spot, which we feel is missing in Royal Oak, which is the missing middle, which is a condo that's not too big, not too expensive. Which eliminating units and square footage doesn't help that objective. Yes, we did think about it, and it wasn't about maximizing the property. It was trying to make something that works from a parking perspective and from a square footage perspective. So it is difficult to do. It is difficult to do what you're asking.
And one other question, within the configuration that's here right now, are there garage doors, or is this open so that, again, I'm thinking about the safety of people walking. I understand the sound system, but are there doors, or is this something people are going to see, or is the door part of the process as well?
The door is definitely part of the process. The door is open, as is the entire perimeter of the building. Well, not the entire perimeter, but the east, west, and the south side are open. So you do get airflow, and you can see through. If you're coming out of the building, having parked in the building and you're coming out, you can see through the aluminum screens we have as part of the architecture. So I guess to answer your question, yes, it's open, and yes, you can see through it.
Could someone walk through
So
it?
you can see who's coming. No. It's got a garage door. It has a garage door.
Okay.
It's secured.
It is secured. Okay, thank you.
Is it a roll-up door? Is that what it is?
It is a roll-up door.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Wasn't sure. So when somebody walks by, what's going to happen when somebody wants to exit the parking? The door's going to roll up, and what else is going to happen?
A light for those who can't. Both audible and visual alerts that say something's happening. So, plus the gate rolling out. So there's all kinds of indications that something's happening, which would protect somebody from walking past the 10-foot wide drive.
All right. I have another couple of follow-up questions as long as I'm talking. Do I understand that, maybe I read this wrong, you've got 2 separate parking sections on the first floor, right?
Correct.
Does one of them have a maneuvering aisle that's only 18 foot 10 inches and the other one has 20 foot, or are they both 18 foot 10 inches?
They are both 18 foot 10 inches.
Okay. All right. I'll ask another couple questions if you don't mind. Tell me about the garbage containers. You've got garbage and recycling in 2 spots. it looks to me like they're going to have to come out. They come out towards the sidewalk, and then they're rolled to where to be dumped.
They're rolled by the trash company to the truck directly. So they're not left at the curb and taken back. They're taken emptied and then taken back inside.
Now the company is going to have to stop somewhere. I assume they're going to have to stop on the street.
Correct.
And is the tell me about the containers. Are they big metal? Or are they plastic? Or how big are they? Tell me something about it.
I could hold this up in front of you, but they are 4 foot tall, 6 feet long, and 3 feet wide.
And
they're probably metal.
Okay. So, but they're maneuverable by one person.
They're on wheels. Yes.
All right. And this particular exercise is going to happen, I assume, once a week. Do we know?
I presume. I think Chris Rokevich might be able to answer that better, but I presume once a week or as necessary.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr.
Contract with, like right now we're using Detroit Disposal, but they would provide that service to wheel the 2-yard dumpster out, dump it, and then wheel it back into the building once a week.
One of the concerns that was expressed to us, or expressed to me, and also Ms. Beakey, we happen to be there, is that the trucks would have to stop in the street, it appears to them. It's a narrow street, a particularly narrow street, and in the morning, when the kids are back in school, there's all sorts of parents on the street and kids, and this is a consideration that they were concerned about, is that it would possibly add to a dangerous backup situation if the truck showed up at the wrong moment. Have you considered that impact?
Well, I think on a residential street like where I live, you put out 3 or 4 cans, the trash company stops in front of your house, and then they unload the cans
in the street.
And then in the street, and then they drive away to the next person's house. So I think it's a pretty common situation.
Well, I think the issue was that there's a middle school at the end of the street, and this street gets a lot of traffic, is what we were told, in the morning. So I bring that to your attention. I don't know what can be done about it, but I can tell you that it was expressed to us as a concern should those things happen at the same time. Commissioner Douglas, you're on mute. Commissioner, you're on mute, Commissioner.
Oh, sorry. I live on Washington, 3 houses north of the middle school. I've lived there for more than 20 years, and I have watched the garbage trucks figure out when school is in session and avoid that street when school is in session, just for common sense purposes. So I'm pretty confident that the trash haulers for this development are going to quickly figure that out and choose a pickup time that doesn't conflict with school traffic.
Thanks for your comment there. Makes sense. I'm going to ask another question, if I may, as long as I'm at it. We were asked a question about the buffer. There's a 25 by 50 foot patch of lawn to the west of the building. And we also understand, or I understand, this belongs to the neighbor to the north. Is that something you can confirm? This is a patch of grass that is. Do you know what the future holds for this patch of grass, or can you tell us anything about it? If you know.
Well, I'll answer that. We have 10 feet from our west end to our property line. And then there's another 50 feet beyond that to the west. That's not our property. That's part of the parcel of the property to the north of us. So the setback from the property owner to the residential property owner to the west is basically 60 feet from our building. And we have no conversations with the adjacent owner as to what might be in plan, like the plan for that property.
Okay, appreciate that. Other questions for the petitioners? Mr. Cantina. You're on mute.
There we go. So yeah, I too appreciate the applicant really taking to heart our contingencies from the preliminary approval, making some changes and coming back today. I do recognize that it is a smaller, challenging site on Main Street. I do support residential density at this location, but I'm not sure if some of the revisions that were made go far enough to what we were expecting or wanted to see. I appreciate the setback on Main Street going from the sidewalk to now 4 foot up to 10 feet. I've got some questions there because to me, it's still going to be, you know, essentially a wall. Now we've pushed this wall a little bit further away from the sidewalk, the experience of that pedestrian, but the building face is still, you know, essentially going to be a wall. And I'm not sure that a wall simply 4 feet away, you know, appreciably changes the experience when you're walking down. I did notice that that is a landscaped area now, and the plan was to for some of the plantings to be elements that are intended to grow up that building. I'm just not sure if that's active enough right there. I do support Commissioner Douglas's suggestion about placing art in that area. I think that is something that's very active and would be a good pedestrian experience. I do have concerns about the drive access on Austin. Another proposal came through similarly, and I expressed the same concern. And it's really a sight lines issue because that building facade and that garage really come right up to that sidewalk. Despite the fact that there will be a door, audible alarms, visual alarms, you really, you know, from that vehicle exiting until it's essentially in front of the pedestrian, there's not a lot of time, there's not a lot of sight lines. I do understand those warning devices will help, but that does still remain a concern to me. I certainly appreciate I was the one that commented about sustainability and incorporating some sustainable elements. The landscaped areas and the rain garden, I appreciate, but I'm not sure if they're big enough or if that's enough from a sustainable standpoint. So I have some questions there on the rain garden. It's been referred to a couple different ways. Is it actually a rain garden or is it a bioswale? Because they are two distinctly different things. I just want to make sure that I'm clear on what's being proposed.
It is a bioswale.
It is a bioswale. Okay. And I know the city does have some not necessarily ordinances, but some guidelines for rain gardens and other stormwater management, things like this. Were those consulted at all in the design of this? And the size of this, were you able to do any calculations at all as to the amount of stormwater that it can actually hold?
That would be an engineering question. I don't believe I have that knowledge of what was done, but I do know that Nowak and Frous is the engineer for the site, and they do know the city of Royal Oak, and they would certainly accommodate the requirements for engineering specifics, the drainage, detention, retainage. As far as the bioswale goes, I can't answer that question. The bioswale was designed by them to be a bioswale, so I assume it is by city definition a bioswale.
So is it fair to say then that the driver for the size of the bioswale was more to meet the 10% landscaped area contingency more so than the sustainability contingency?
Well, obviously it's based on what area we have left to work with. You have to understand that we're in conflict with a lot of things. The site itself, the square footage of it, the parking requirement, the aisle widths. So what's left is kind of left. And we did try to make a bioswale that's actually workable, that actually is sustainable, that actually does work. So that was a directive to Nowak and Frous, the engineer. And I assume that's what they've accomplished.
Okay. Last question or comment that I've got is without trying to design the building or redesign the building for you, one of the questions that I have, or I guess we want some discussion on, is if we look at the southern facade of the building up along Austin, we've talked about the driveway width, we've talked about the concern of vehicles going in and out and the safety of the students and any pedestrians. One of the questions that I have, because I was looking at the two landscaped areas, and the one on Main Street just didn't seem active enough for me. And one of the thoughts that I had was, and this is really just for discussion, if the parking requirements were changed such that you had to lose a few spaces along Austin, it seems like some of the concerns we have regarding the pedestrian experience along both facades are really at that pedestrian level. Is there the potential to push back the building facade at the street level, maintain the building facade at the second and third story levels? It would require to lose a few parking spaces and sort of figure out what else you can do with the trash enclosure there. But part of my thought was, do we then lend ourselves an opportunity to put another landscape area along Austin at that pedestrian level, connect that west and east landscape areas, and make that much more active along the pedestrian level? I think if you look at the Main Street landscape area, if that too becomes a rain garden along with art in there, that becomes a very active engagement at the pedestrian level, especially if as you're rounding that corner, it connects to another system, in the back there. So I guess that's just something food for thought. I guess, architecturally speaking, again, I don't want to design the building for you, but just something to throw out there to help address some of the concerns of the experience at that pedestrian level.
So the short answer for me is certainly you can eliminate parking spaces and do something more. As the developer, which I can't speak to, would you do that? Right? I mean, you sell a property for X amount of dollars a square foot and you expect certain things. I think you might expect 2 parking spaces, which your ordinance requires. So I don't think you could sell a parking space and a half, basically. So I direct the question to Chris, actually, to answer better.
I think parking is important for anybody, and not only for the person who buys the unit. I also think it's important for the neighborhood and the businesses around.
That was an
In
issue.
most cases, you might just have a single person buying a unit, and maybe most of the time they don't use their second space, but there is going to be times when they do have friends come over or whatever, and if they don't have that second space, they're going to either park on the street in the neighborhood, which you wouldn't want, or sneak their car across the street at the hair salon or the grocery store. So I would rather have ample parking so that people can have guests over and we're not impeding on what's going on in our space, in our neighborhood space. So that's why I always like to have extra spaces. I live next door to a condo building that I developed, and we have 12 extra spaces, and probably in an average day there's probably only 6 or 7 cars, and but sometimes you need that extra space in case people have people over a party or whatever. They have that extra parking, and they're never on the city street. They never park on Maxwell. They just park in the parking lot.
Yes,
which I think is important.
My counter to that would be that this site in a downtown area like this, we would want to encourage more walking and less vehicle traffic. And by your own words, the usual condition at the other development leaves excess parking spaces, which then lends me to believe, to beg the question, do we need this many parking? I fully understand, certainly the units are more saleable when you have the 2 units. I'm just wondering to enrich the robustness of the building, right? If we were to be a little bit more flexible with the parking, is it something that you could get away with? I understand it's what's required. If that requirement were to change, do you think you'd have a saleable unit? But I think the answer you're giving is no.
Speaking. You're on mute, too.
again, related to the issue of the parking spaces, and personally, I like the idea of that main floor setback. Again, from both a safety perspective as well as an environmental perspective, I think it would go a long way to making this building more appropriate for that space. If that first floor were set back, even with that, and again, the parking loss is something to think about. But on a positive note, again, for cities that have a lot of winter weather, we just listened to the Michigan Planning Commission, when you get into these taller buildings, and this one is not excessively tall, but that first floor being at a different setback helps also with the cold and stuff as far as walkability, because it changes and you don't get the downdraft as much in cold weather. So that's another positive, again, from a neighborhood perspective. And with regard to the parking, decoupling the price of the parking from the actual units would afford someone who either doesn't drive at all and takes the bus or uses a bike or walks to work because they're nearby, not have to pay for that parking spot, which then can be sold to someone else. And again, I've lived in condos, I've lived in apartments. I'm very familiar with the units you did along 11 Mile because I pass by there at least 5 times a week. Again, for this particular space, I think we just don't have, we might not have the luxury if we want to get this many units of apartments in place to make compromises at the ground level. I think would go a long way for making this building more appealing to the neighbors and more consistent with the neighborhood. And so that might be a good place to make a trade-off without losing the actual units themselves. Anyway, that's my perspective. I like that as a compromise because otherwise those 4 square walls coming down, I have a difficult problem with that being just right up against the sidewalk, even with those warning signals for the various reasons we discussed. And as Gary mentioned, he and I were out there, about an hour or so before this meeting, or maybe a little bit earlier. And in the number of bikes, the number of people walking, again, this is exactly what we want to see more of in Royal Oak. And the more that we stay consistent with that physical infrastructure and messaging, I think the better off we are. And the one other thing I would note, and this is a kind of a crazy idea, but in many places, if we were to slow down Austin and make it a more, again, bike and pedestrian oriented street in terms of the car traffic, that would be another way to make it more justifiable to have the building closer to the street. But I don't know, as a city, we're there yet as far as these kind of streets that almost become like a plaza, that the walking is the main function. But anyway, that's a thought I had looking at this as well.
Commissioner Douglas.
Gary, you have a public hearing you need to open and play as well.
I keep forgetting that. Is there Commissioner Douglas? Can you hold your thought?
Hang on. I have just 2 quick things, and then I have another larger thought, which I will save to later. Mr. Young, you are required to keep stormwater detained on your property, correct?
Yes, he is.
Yes.
I'll answer that. Yes.
Okay. So the bioswale that they've built will handle some rainwater, but the fact is that this property will detain rainwater and trickle it into the system to avoid overloading our pipes. And then the second question, still in love with my idea about public art on that east facade. Your plan right now calls for screening material, for screened fabric. Is that, and Mr. Twing may answer this as well, is that a building code requirement or an aesthetic choice for you?
Well, for us, as the architect, that's an aesthetic choice. That was to actually specifically address your that was part of the response to that, plus the setback, which, by the way, the setback that we did achieve is a result of actually banging heads with DTE. So it's not something we control. It was originally 15 feet, so we managed to get 10 feet off of the pole, and that we gave to the front yard on Main.
I have some broader observations, but I'll save those until after the public hearing, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. All right, so not that you can't ask more questions of the commissioner if you have them, but Mr. Twing, are there public comments on this agenda item?
I believe Carol has one phone call that came in, I believe.
All right, if we can hear that, Carol, at this time, we appreciate it.
All right, let me get this ready.
Maggie Bioman, and I live with my husband Jeff at 126 Austin Avenue. I'm calling in reference to case number SP200710 at 803 North Main Street. Our home is the first residential property to the west of the proposed construction site. We have persistent concerns about the following. One, pedestrian, bicycle, and auto safety traffic safety at the Austin and Main intersection and the eastern segment of Austin Avenue. Two, the impact of an increased demand on sewer and water resources. Three, vehicle parking and standing issues due to increased number of vehicles accessing condos. Number one, the revised site plan still decreases visibility at the intersection of Austin and Main, particularly posing a risk to bicycle and pedestrian traffic. Eastbound traffic on Austin will be blind to fast-moving bicyclists and runners crossing Austin. It's already an issue, and we envisage a larger problem as visibility is decreased. Number two, we are highly concerned that the significant increase in sewer and water usage that this project will require will cause sewage to back up into the surrounding residences. This project, as designed, will more than double the sewer and water usage of our entire block. New building in Royal Oak often leads to wet basements for neighbors as land is graded away from the new building. We would like to know what specific improvements are being planned at this time to accommodate the demand this project will create. Will a stormwater detention system be included in this project? What does the sewer analysis that was done after the 2014 flood say about this area? Who will take responsibility for sewer and water backup should they occur? The owner of the building? The city? Number three, the revised plan still does not address the problem of visitor parking and access for large service vehicles. We are concerned that this will cause overflow onto Austin and will violate the current north side fire lane regulation and south side resident permit parking restrictions. In years past, the neighborhood found it necessary to petition the city for homeowner permit parking because customers of nearby businesses monopolize the parking on our street. We foresee visitors to the condos using our paid parking spaces as well as waste disposal, delivery, and service trucks causing congestion on our street and obstructing our driveways. It is unclear how the dumpster and the recycling bins located in the parking garage of the building will be accessed by the garbage trucks in the current doorway design, which appears to be 10 feet by 10 feet. To recap, our three concerns are traffic and pedestrian safety, sewer and water systems becoming overloaded and backing up in our basements, three, parking problems and congestion on Austin Avenue. Thank you.
All right. That's the only one, I take it?
Yep, that was the only public comment called in for this.
Thank you. Can I make a follow-up question right here to Mr. Twing? So we heard that there's stormwater detention, so that's going to restrict discharge of stormwater into the sewer system. I assume it's a combined sewer system there. The question from the caller there was whether or not, if I understand it correctly, whether or not the now whatever 8 times 3 bathrooms or 2.5 bathrooms and laundry will cause a overload of the system such that it may cause backups. Is that something that is a concern? Can you tell us about that at all?
Well, they'll have to comply with the city's ordinances at the point if this goes forward and receives approval, and if they go forward and submit for building permits, part of their review and design will be engineered drawings that show how they are going to comply with the city stormwater ordinance and other ordinances to handle their own runoff and water systems based on the utilities that are there. So they'll have to prepare those drawings and get permits from engineering.
So I think what you're saying, and I just want this on the record because they asked the question, the amount of wastewater from use of the apartments is something that is addressed in the code already, that they'll have to pass muster to meet those standards when they provide their final design. Is that what I understand?
Yes, when they do their construction documents.
Okay, very good. Thank you. All right. Are there any other questions for the petitioner? All right, I will bring it up. There's one. Commissioner Douglas.
No, not a question for the petitioner.
Oh, are you ready to have a discussion?
Yes.
Let's have a discussion. You go first.
Okay, this proposal came to us previously, and and our job as planning commissioners is to look at a plan and, in this case, a planned unit development, and again, either recommend or do not recommend it to the city. In their first appearance before us, we talked about a lot of concepts that have come up again today. But at the end of that meeting, we gave the applicant some very detailed instructions about what we wanted from this development. And they have met all of our, almost all of our requirements. The one that they did not meet that is dear to my heart is the whole issue of providing pedestrian level interest at the street level. And I, at some point here, will make a motion here to address that with the idea that I presented previously. But it's not fair to them for us now to be not second guessing, but third guessing them after they have brought back plans that respond to the things that we asked them for.
Speaking.
In the last discussion where we did agree to send this back to them, I agree they have met them to a certain degree, but as Mr. Gontina mentioned it in his comments, I believe they may have not gone far enough given this site. My inclination for the site is to keep it as a neighborhood business site as it was, although I do like the idea of residential there. But if residential is in this location, I would like to see something that goes a bit further in bridging that neighborhood street on Austin and Main. And I do think this came a long way, but that issue of that first floor on Austin, the main level being right up against the sidewalk with no buffering still is my biggest contention. And then the other one I'll echo from some of the written comments we got. People were concerned about the balconies and overseeing the houses that are just beyond this property line. And so again, when we allow a building to go up in height right against residential homes, it is overlooking them. And so that is another area where I wonder if we need to be more respectful for those houses that are right behind. Again, I'm very positively inclined to want to see residential in this area, and I don't mind multi-family residential, but I'm not sure this has gone as far as I would hope, although it's made absolutely significant strides from the last time we spoke.
Do I see a hand there from Mr. Gontina? Yes.
I guess I just want to say one last thing in the sense that, what's before us is consideration of a PUD approval, planned unit development. And one of the most important things, criteria for that is the community benefit. And while I agree that they've come a long way, I really struggle that the community benefit is enough, everything else being considered. That one criteria for me is this is really our opportunity to try to get something that we wouldn't normally be able to get through other zoning. And I'm just not sure that the community benefit that's being provided is enough for what's being proposed here with all the concerns that have already been cited.
Other comments? I'll make a couple. I agree with Commissioner Douglas. We sent these petitioners off with a task. They came back, they didn't meet every single thing that we asked them, but they did meet a lot of them. And I think our task is to decide whether or not that have they gone far enough. I agree that it's not fair to the petitioner to now ask them to make major redesigns, which we didn't bring up before. As for the criteria, yeah, I don't think if you didn't do a PUD, you couldn't get a viable residential project on this site. And I think that is a material benefit to the community and to the users, in the community. And in fact, this is conceptually a lower impact use. You're going from business to residential. There's business all over around it. So I think that is a benefit. I don't think it's an unreasonable, it doesn't create an unreasonable increase in the need or the burden upon public services, the facilities and the streets. We haven't seen any indication of that. I know the caller was concerned about that, but I think the code addresses that. I think it's consistent with public health, safety, and welfare. I think the safety concern about cars coming out is a factor. I think it needs to be addressed. I think I think the petitioner has addressed it. The question for us is whether it's addressed well enough. That may be a judgment call. I think that they have with the roll-up doors, the light, and the sound. You're really just trying to protect people on the sidewalk there, and I think that is adequate in my mind. I don't think it'll have any negative economic impact on the properties. I think it'll be a positive. A comment was just made about balconies. Well, just so you know, the design criteria, the standards for multifamily housing in our zoning says you're supposed to have open space, including balconies, courtyards, etc. The only way you can have one here is they have a balcony, and they put it in there. So they're in conformance with our code. I guess there's one I don't know. Mr. Brocken, is it Brockentina? Is this going to be single ownership and control that's going to develop this property?
Yes.
Okay, so they met number 5. And then the proposed development should be consistent with the goals and policies of the master plan. Well, this is consistent with the zoning. It fits into the zoning and the future land use. So I think it meets the criteria, and so I'm going to be supporting it. Those are my comments. Anybody else? Mr. Klooster.
Yeah, so looking, one of the conditions was for our preliminary PUD recommendation was to resolve the safety issues with the 10-foot entry drives and the narrow parking lanes. And while they've made an attempt with the alerts, the narrow 10-foot drive is not going to accommodate two-way parking, and the way the parking is set up, you have two-way vehicle access in that tight area, and it just I don't see that it's resolved in this. So while I appreciate the efforts that were taken, I think that this is an issue that's a safety issue. It's not just hey, we desire it to be more landscaped here, we desire this, this is a potential public safety issue. And I have difficulty with the way it was resolved, and don't see it being substantially more safe than the original proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Klooster. Any other comments? Ms. Beakey.
Now, can I ask this question? I mean, is it allowed at this juncture to ask for further modification without being? I mean, I think the safety concerns and prior, whether you're walking or this issue with the driveways, I think are significant. Or if we say no, then it just disappears. Or what is the process if it were denied at this juncture? Just for my clarification.
Again, you're making a recommendation to the city commission. So it would, whatever you would recommend would go to the city commission.
So similar to the last issue. So I guess I'll just comment that, again, I like the direction it has gone. I feel like it needs to go a little further. So I won't be able to support it at this juncture. I think it's made great strides, and I would love to see something like this there. But again, I think the scale is not quite there yet in terms of providing what we need. So that's where I am on that.
Other comments? Motion? Folks are pondering.
Well, you do have the option to recommend approval with the plan that's in front of you with the contingencies. You do have the option to recommend approval with those contingencies and additional contingencies. And obviously you have the option to recommend denial of the final plan based on whatever your concerns were reasons for. So those are the broad, I guess, options for the Planning Commission to consider.
Commissioner Douglas.
And as with the previous case, even if we recommend denial, this proposal still goes before the City Commission, noting the Planning Commission's vote. Mr. Twing?
That's correct.
Yeah, thanks. All right, I'm going to make a motion.
Commissioner Douglas.
Okay, I want to make a motion to approve to recommend this plan to the City Commission with one additional contingency, that being that the petitioner in consultation with the Royal Oak Commission for the Arts pay for the installation and maintenance of artwork on the ground level of the eastern facade, and that the building materials for that facade be also consistent with the Arts Commission's design.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Second by the mayor. Further discussion? Mr. Mayor.
I'll just add, a lot of points have been made tonight, and all of them are valid, right? You know, I do agree that we, you know, made some requests out of the petitioner to go back in good faith and come back with something reasonable to accommodate some of the concerns that we had. I do feel that the concerns of the neighborhood that have been articulated in the past and today related to traffic. I mean, obviously you have a lower use related to sewer and all that stuff. I mean, clearly they're going to be detaining water and they have a bioswale put in place. So I think those major things, at least in my mind, that I was concerned about have been resolved adequately. We're never going to get a perfect project, and we want to be careful about, you know, in my opinion, I mean, there are things clearly that I think we should improve upon it. But, you know, there's also the alternative where the project goes away, a negative recommendation is provided to the City Commission. They vote against it, and, you know, we get another use there that doesn't really fit, or something that conforms to the existing use that really doesn't fit into the grand scheme of things of what we want to achieve. So I just encourage my colleagues, you know, we're never going to get that perfect project, but, you know, we have to look at the sum of what it's bringing, and I think it's bringing a lot of positive things to the community. There are a few downsides, but such is life. So that's why I'll be supporting this. And I think just a very clever idea, you know, as a compromise and resolve here. The art thing to me was a great add to this, Commissioner Douglas. Thank you, because as we've seen success on 4th Street with art going down there, and the neighbors love it. And I think the neighbors are going to love the art installations if this ultimately gets built right there on Main.
Ms. Beakey.
Again, and I appreciate that comment as far as having a positive go forward. I would prefer to see, again, a further contingency that main floor have some further setback. So again, that's my opinion, because I think it would make a big difference in this process. And we've only discussed this twice. And I hope that the commission will, some of this information will move forward if it.
Thank you. Other discussion? All right, seeing none, I'm going to call for the vote. The motion is Commissioner Douglas's motion to recommend approval of the PUD with the stated contingencies and the additional contingency regarding the art on the eastern facade. All right. Mayor Fournier.
Yes.
Commissioner Douglas.
Yes.
Ms. Beakey.
No.
Mr. Klooster.
No.
Mr. Gantina.
No.
And I'm a yes. So that leaves us at 3 and 3, and that means that it does not pass. So is there another motion? I suppose the motion would have to be to deny it, but or to add other contingencies.
I mean, I have not made a formal motion as the person, but I could make a motion to approve it with the additional contingency of the art as outlined by Ms. Douglas, as well as a modification of the facade. And again, this may include, I don't want to dictate it's taking away the parking space of the first floor facade to provide both more safety and transparency and walkability along the sidewalk.
Is there a second?
Yeah.
All right. I don't hear a second for that. Oh, Santina. Is that a second? It's a second. Okay. Is there discussion? All right. So the Commissioner Douglas.
Yeah, what does that mean? I mean, if we're, Mr. Twing made it clear the last time they were before us that if there are things that we want, we need to be clear and concrete and precise about exactly what we want. So let's put this into words. I mean, talk about walkability and, I mean, what physically do you want?
I think Mr. Gotita expressed it well in his statement. There's a potential for setting back the facade along Austin. He suggested all 4 parking spaces. I'm suggesting something less to the discretion of the petitioner. I think it's pretty clear if you go along that site, whether it's 2 spaces. Again, I'm not an architect. I'm a walker. I'm a city user. And I'm suggesting that there must be a way to modify that first floor. I could think of things myself around the entrance doors and such, but I don't think that's appropriate for me to dictate. And this is a recommendation to the city commission, so I'm suggesting that's what I would like to see, but if it doesn't pass, that's fine. Someone else can put something forward. I don't have something specific, detailed. I could come up with something, but I don't think that's appropriate.
Do you have a minimum setback that you're looking for along Austin in terms of feet? Did you have 3 feet, 4
if the
feet,
for the visual
5
triangle
feet?
was 10, I would say 10. I think we used to have 25 from a residential area. And again, the PUD provides something that gives that heightened flexibility. Again, to say 10, I could say 10. But I think that's a little bit, I mean, again, if you want me to do the research, I can look up different buildings and come up with it. I think it's pretty clear as far as the safety goes. I mean, Mr. Klooster has more experience, obviously, in building design. But again, how I phrase this is not appropriate, then I can even rescind it. But I cannot articulate that specific.
Is it possible for me to make a suggestion or no?
How about you make a comment and we'll listen to you.
Well, I'm thinking like, what if we were to keep it more open? Because, there is spaces on both sides of the garage that are like have some screening, and maybe make that so maybe it doesn't have the screening, so you can see on either side of the garage is openness. Maybe make it like a half wall or something like that, so you can easily see over it, see if someone's coming, but still keep the opening at 10 feet. And still keep the parking spaces that we need in order to make the project viable.
All right, thank you. At the moment, we have a motion that has been seconded, in which has all the department's contingencies, plus the art contingency, plus the contingency to make the south side, repeat, Ms. Beaky?
At the main level, the street level, to make that south side facade in that corner, is safer for pedestrians. I prefer a setback. Maybe openness would be the appropriate thing. That's my suggestion.
Can I make a suggestion on language?
Well, for discussion, go ahead.
So, and because I agree with Commissioner Douglas, I think we need to try to be as specific as possible if we're going to be moving this forward with some sort of a recommendation. But I do think I guess maybe it's for discussion, to propose some sort of visual transparency along the Austin Street facade to improve safety and pedestrian experience. Did that make sense?
Well, let me ask a question of Mr. Twing. So if you give that sort of instruction, Mr. Twing, what can the city commission do with it? Will they have to assess a new design? They don't got to have a new design in front of them, are they?
Well, they're going to have to get, the petitioner with his architect are going to present a new design that identifies how they believe they've modified the first floor of Austin to make it safer in terms of walkability and visual transparency. If they suggest eliminating the screens, narrowing the columns, and leaving it more open, and the city commission accepts that redesign, then it'll move forward as an approval.
Okay, and I saw Mr. Longe wanted to make a comment, but I need to clarify, Mr. Twing. So there would be an opportunity for the petitioner to provide a new design. We won't see that design. The city commission will see it only.
That's correct.
All right. I don't know what happened to Mr. Longe. He had his hand up and then he disappeared. I hope we didn't lose him. He might have.
Could have dropped off, but
the way I have my screen, he's not on there. Ms. Beakey.
Again, the transparency is good as far as the pedestrian safety. And I guess I would like to ask Mr. Gontina again, based on his previous suggestion about like if removing the spaces. I mean, the wording now is a different concept than having some of that setback of the actual building versus just transparency. I'm thinking if you sacrifice 2 spaces that somehow in there that help. But again, based on what you had said earlier, Mr. Gontina.
Yeah, I'll respond to that. So I guess the main concern along Austin is that pedestrian experience and the safety. Certainly one option is to push the entire building back, encompassing what would amount to be 2 parking spaces and the trash area. It's certainly one option. I guess in my mind, if your experience is opened up there where the building facade is actually still where it is, but isn't a hard wall or rolled up doors or that same experience, if you're somehow in some other way able to provide some sort of visual transparency to that facade without sacrificing the parking spaces in the trash area, you improve the safety and you improve the pedestrian experience at that level there. It doesn't necessarily, address any additional landscaping areas or anything like that. But I'm just thinking if I'm walking along that street, from a safety perspective, the more I can see into or through that building at that level, the safer I believe it to be. So that's, I guess, the response to the question or comment.
I'm going to make a comment to that. The more transparent you are, the more you're going to see the cars and inside the parking deck, which is then an aesthetic detriment. So everything's a trade-off. There's Mr. Longe. He's back.
I'm sorry. Can I speak for a second?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm sorry I ran out of power, but I want to make it clear to everybody that the screens are open. It's open air. You can visually see through. The screen is nothing more than something that is to create visual interest. And from an angle, an acute angle, you can't see directly into the garage, but it's all open air. You can see through it. It is all open. So you can see pedestrians as they walk by. You can see a car as it's coming out, going in. It's open.
Okay, thank you.
And I guess since I've made the motion, I mean, I still think, again, the setback is more the issue than the openness. But again, if what I'm saying is too imprecise, then I withdraw it and someone else should make a motion.
Okay. Well, I guess I want to clarify what your pleasure is there, because we have a motion that you made and we have a second, so we can take a vote on it. Or do you want to withdraw it and rephrase it, or let another member phrase the motion.
I mean, maybe somebody else can rephrase it more appropriately if they're understanding what I'm saying. Mr. Guntina took a stab at it. Do you want to proceed with that? Although, actually, I'll withdraw it and wait till someone else makes a motion. My concern is that on Austin, the setback is not appropriate. That's why I voted no on the other, and I'll leave it at that, and I'll withdraw my motion.
All right. So the motion is withdrawn. Mr. Twing, I hope that's procedurally, it seems like it should be. You should be able to withdraw a motion. So, is there another motion that another member would like to make? And I'm wondering if, I don't know how much I can badger people. I think, there, Mr. Mayor.
Well, we had a vote on this and it pushed 3-3, given the nature of, the makeup of the commission tonight. Maybe this is a question for Mr. Liss or Mr. Twing. I mean, I guess that's a motion. The motion fails. So you don't have a positive recommendation. You have a 3-3 split. And I suspect if you have another vote to not recommend, you'll have a 3-3 split. So this puts us into some sort of conundrum. And then now we're like finessing, a bunch of different things. And I think Ms. Beakey makes good points, but maybe Mr. Klooster has a different point. And, I'm wondering, can it be put to the commission that they took a vote to, a motion was made to recommend to make a recommendation, and we ended up doing a 3-3 split, and that's the input that gets sent to the city commission to say, hey, look, this was debated, and here are some of the nuances behind it, maybe in the letter that you present.
That is, I would think.
Mr. Mayor, right now, as the recommendation stands, there is no affirmative recommendation, there is no negative recommendation. But beyond that, I don't see any limitation where the Plan Commission can send explanation of what happened or what individual planning commissioners believe.
So this would basically, Mr. Liss, just go to the commission as of right now, as a, hey, there was no recommendation one way or another. It was a 3-3 vote on this motion, and, whatever color Mr. Twing wants to add, or you want to add to it as part of the discussion, that's a possibility. It doesn't stall anything. It doesn't not move on to the next evaluation, correct?
Correct.
Well, I don't think I recall ever being in this particular situation before. Maybe we have, but so I'm going to ask Mr. Twing or Mr. Liss, what is the procedural next step? We don't have another motion, and we have had a vote. Is that end the discussion on the agenda item and we move on?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Liss. All right. To the petitioners, you've heard the results here tonight. Thank you very much for your presentation, and wish you the best of luck. Thank you. And we'll move on to the next item. All right, which is other business. Potential zoning ordinance text amendment for tree replacement fee. I think, Mr. Twing, you're going to tell us all about this.
Yes, I will, as soon as I get it up on my screen.
All right.
All right. Planning Commission members may remember that we've had some discussion about the tree replacement requirements in the ordinance, and the provisions that are in there, and the one that came up most recently in discussions at the Planning Commission, City Commission meetings on a prior project, had to do with the portion that represented a petitioner's ability to pay a fee in lieu of actually replacing the fees on the 2-to-1 ratio. As we looked at that, staff, the way it was in the current zoning ordinance, it would have required for each petitioner to have a separate agreement with the city, and therefore a separate action at the city commission in order to either approve an agreement for the tree fee or license agreement or some legal document. What staff is suggesting in this amendment or draft amendment is that rather than having that agreement, we would simply have a fee that the city commission would establish by resolution, maybe once a year, based on DPS's tree schedule or some other tree schedule that we would take to the city commission for their approval. And therefore, the petitioner, if the planning commission approved a project with fewer trees but allowed payment in, there wouldn't be the added step of having to go to the city commission for an agreement. They would simply have to pay into a fund based on that tree schedule. So it was, after some discussion at staff level, we thought that was something we would recommend to the planning commission for consideration. The other part of the revision was in regards to the way it was previously written. It indicated that you'd really do one or the other. You would either review a landscape plan and approve the tree planting, or you would approve an agreement that allowed them to pay into the fee. It seemed to take away the option for both to occur. So we've made some modifications, suggested modifications that would allow both items 1 and 2 to potentially occur in a single project. That's really the background behind it. The changes that were there, and again, where this came up was a prior project where there was some discussion about the tree fee and the replacement fund.
All right, thank you. What would you like? What is our duty here today? Do we?
It's a draft. It's a draft document. If there are comments or suggested revisions, we would take those. If you don't have any, we'll simply schedule this for a public hearing, do the notices for it, and put it on a future meeting, whether that's November or December's. But all we're looking for tonight is either some concurrence in the approach, the draft language, or if you have questions or want to go a different direction, we're looking for your input. No formal action other than we'd schedule a hearing at a future meeting.
All right. Are there comments? Ms. Beakey.
I like very much the idea that the developer or whoever's in the process of replacing the trees would have some option, because if we've seen in some of the different cases we've looked at, the number of trees overall has diminished, and there's not really a way to reincorporate that. So that I think the fund is a great idea, and will be a great benefit to the city to be able to use that to plant the trees in a different location. The one thing about this that concerns me is when we look at the existing tree and we just count it as an entity, there's no reflection of its value in terms of size, scale, years, age, or a community benefit, because again, a 130-year-old oak tree has more benefit than a 1-year-old birch tree or that kind of thing. And so I don't know if the timing is right on this particular part of the zoning. But eventually I'd like to see us have some language in here about the actual size and value of the tree outside of it just being counted as a 1-to-1. So if you have a 200-year-old tree you're removing, I think either there should be a very large fee and or permission from the city and the replacement has to be more than 2 trees in those kinds of cases. Again, I don't know how this discussion has evolved over time. I've made some of these comments to the environmental advisory group, which I believe they haven't met that much recently, but I just want to state that in this context as well. I think the older trees, the heritage trees, are a community value that should be counted more than just as a 1 to 2 new trees. So the size and the age.
If I can, as part of your, this ordinance only applies to those projects that are going through site plan approval / special land use approval. This ordinance doesn't apply to single family homes or residential areas. And as part of your site plan approval in front of the Planning Commission, one of the items they're required to submit is a landscape plan. And as part of that, a tree survey as to what they're removing. So as part of your discretion, reviewing those site plans and special land uses, you have all the discretion in the world to look at whether the size of the tree or its benefit is something you would tell them they have to maintain. I don't believe we need to write another or revise that wording that's in the current landscape ordinance. Again, this isn't talking about sites where they're not going through some site plan or special land use approval.
Do those sites have requirements in terms of landscaping and replacement? The ones you're referring to that don't come to us?
No.
None at all?
No, the only requirement out is you can't take a tree that's in the public right of way down without city permission. But if it's a tree on your own private property, you can remove it anytime you want.
Okay, so we have no protections in place.
Not for that.
Okay, thank you.
Other comments? I'll make a comment. I think this makes a lot of sense. I think as originally written, this would have allowed the Planning Commission to waive the requirements because it made sense. But if they couldn't please the Planning Commission, they'd have to go and see the City Commission and pay for their misdeeds of cutting down the trees and not replacing them. Now it says if we're going to grant a waiver for the 2-for-1 tree requirement, that's fine. We can grant that, but you're going to make this payment automatically for the trees you didn't. It's part of the cost of getting this grant of the waiver is you got to pay for the trees, and it's an automatic. So it seems to me it really simplifies it. It takes something off the plate of the City Commission and puts it really back where it should be, I think, here. And it's just an automatic fee. I think it's a very favorable, sensible, and simplified version. So I don't, from my point of view, I think I would be in favor.
Well, if nothing else, we'll just schedule it for a public hearing. I don't know whether we'll put it on November or December. November looks like it might be a fairly busy meeting, but we'll figure that out. We'll go through it.
All right. Any other comments on this? Any contributions by anybody else? All right. Seeing none. Thank you very much, Mr. Twing, and please place that on for public hearing. All right. Next agenda item is the meeting schedule and religious holidays for 2021. Mr. Twing, give us our guidance here.
Well, as we do every year, your meetings are generally fall on the second Tuesday of the month. We've identified all of the potential religious holidays that fall within that. If you, in reviewing those as a body, I want to continue with your standard second Tuesday of the month. You can simply adopt the resolution at the bottom of the memo. If you see something you would like to modify, then you'd need to identify that and modify a new date.
All right. Is there input from the commission regarding this proposed resolution? If there isn't any, is there a motion to adopt the resolution as stated in the report? Which is simply to maintain the second Tuesday schedule.
That's correct.
I'll move to adopt the resolution as stated in the staff report.
Is there a second?
Support.
All right. Any further discussion? All right. Seeing none, I will call for the vote. Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Commissioner Douglas.
Yes.
Ms. Beakey.
Yes.
Mr. Klooster.
Yes.
Mr. Gontina.
Yes.
All right, the motion passes. We'll proceed on the second Tuesday of every month throughout 2021. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is administrative site plan approvals. And I looked through this and I do have one question, Mr. Twing, right off the bat. These are site plans and building permit applications. These were all approved or in the process of being approved?
These were all either submissions that came in for building permits that had been in front of the Planning Commission and that staff simply signed off on so that they could go forward. There are others that don't need Planning Commission action and the staff simply signs off on them. Bathroom renovations, by example, of a multifamily dwelling would simply sign off on and move forward. Others the Planning Commission has seen and they're simply coming in for permits and we've signed off on them. So it's an informational item as to what's going on.
All right, any questions for Mr. Twing or comments on this item? All right, seeing none, thank you for the information. And we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is the road report from the Oakland County Road Commission. I hope everybody had a look at that. Any comments on this agenda item or any comments from Mr. Twing on this?
No, it's just an informational item.
All right. Seeing no hands for comments, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is new agenda item, other business G5, which is a discussion of what we met about with the in the joint meeting with the ZBA. So I'm going to let Commissioner Douglas lead the discussion here.
Thank you, Mr. Casada. So, wow, that was like, I don't know how anybody else felt about it, but I felt like that was a fire hose of ideas and sort of pent up problems and issues. And I'm super glad that we were able to meet together and hear about some of those issues. I've always felt like, you know, we at the Planning Commission, you know, approve things and then send it downstream to make trouble for the ZBA. And I was very happy to hear their input. We should discuss what they said and see what courses of action we might take, but we absolutely need to make sure that that meeting is on an agenda, that the public is informed about it, that it goes out in the city's weekly newsletter, for example, and give staff time to, you know, pull together a summary and any other information that they might want to add to it. So I just want us to set a date for that discussion. Mr. Twing said a moment ago that our November agenda looks pretty busy. We could push it to December, or we might consider a special meeting, and I'm open to any suggestions there.
So I would want a clarification here. We had, I think they had 8 or 9 items on their agenda. Just for the record, this is what happened at the special meeting for those in the audience who didn't know. And mostly the Planning Commission listened to the ZBA board members who explained to us various issues that they saw repeatedly that they felt were in need of some being addressed, perhaps through a zoning ordinance amendment, perhaps other ways, but they basically gave us this information. So there are various ways to deal with that. There certainly it suggests that, you know, maybe there needs to be some sort of comprehensive look at this, but I guess I'm just wondering, is the discussion you have in mind, Commissioner Douglas, to recap this in a public, a different public forum, or to take the next step? Give us a little bit more feeling about this.
I want to review the points they made and decide what action, if any, the Planning Commission should take. I think there are issues that they raise that are beyond the scope of our immediate action. There are things that came up there, and even some of our discussion tonight, that even further convince me that it's time for us to review the city's master plan. So we may well look at some of those ideas and say, that's too big, you know, for a tweak to the zoning ordinance. But so there may be some things that we, you know, push down, put into the parking lot for a while. But there may be other suggestions that with maybe a simple tweak to the zoning ordinance, we could improve their lives and the lives of the people whose decisions are, you know, they affect. And so basically it's a review of the points that they made and a decision as to whether or not we act on it or not. And then, you know, probably describing, you know, the timetable of the action, and it's certainly with the input of the staff and how much time it would take them to assemble information about some of these items. Some of them may be low-hanging fruit, you know, a sentence and it's fixed. But that's my intention.
All right. I'm just thinking about how an agenda for that discussion would work, because I think you'd have to have one. And it would sound like what you're suggesting would include those same points. Maybe we wouldn't spend as much time on them, but that would be what you would want to do, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, I would think that there should be a written summary, you know, brief summary of what the discussion items were and you know, the nature of the request from the ZBA or the issues involved that the public can look at so that they can, you know, provide public comment in advance of the meeting and to guide our own thinking.
All right. Is that something that the staff would do a staff report on, Mr. Twing?
Well, we've done minutes for that meeting. I don't know that they're going to be as detailed as some of the, it won't be a verbatim narrative, but the idea of the minutes is going to be so that you get the gist of what the conversation was. We didn't quite have them ready for this meeting, but those minutes could certainly be part of the November Planning Commission meeting. And you may want to take them in bits and pieces and maybe address one or two of them at a time, rather than trying to do, looking back at the prior agenda, I believe there were 9 different items that were listed on the agenda in broad sense. A couple of those, as Commissioner Douglas has indicated, were low-hanging fruit in the sense of one had to deal with requiring petitioners to the ZBA to provide written comments on the hardships and things they need. We tell them to do that, but now we're either going to just insist upon it or remind them of it in some fashion and get it in the application. So some of them will go away. And then there are bigger ones, you know, the off-street parking standards. If you want to address them differently for Woodward Avenue than other locations in Royal Oak, we're almost going to have to spend a great deal of time doing a study of that stretch to be and why it would be something different. So it's quite a gamut in topics, but when I get you the minutes, that might be a place to start and see which ones are priorities for you.
Sounds like it, yes.
And then we can go from there.
All right. Well, I think we'll receive those, and then we may have to have a further discussion, but we can place that discussion on a future Planning Commission meeting. You mentioned November, but if we think we can do that, how will we signal that that's what should be done?
Well, I think when you see the minutes at the November meeting, there'll be the minutes for the September 30th joint meeting. I don't think it would be hard to take 15 minutes of that meeting and list down which things you think are more important. I can clearly tell you which ones are going to take more staff time to address than others. So and then we would have to address them in that fashion. And rather than trying to write another report before November, I'd rather the Planning Commission look at the minutes and then tell us which ones you think are important, and we'll spend time on those first.
Okay, that makes some sense to me. I'm going to want to hear what Commissioner Douglas thinks about it. So what we would do is we would have an approval of the special ZBA meeting minutes in November, and we'd have an approval of those minutes and a discussion thereof.
Right.
And I like Mr. Twing's suggestion that maybe we just put a time limit on it. Look, we're going to spend 15 minutes, going over 15 minutes going over these minutes and kind of achieving a consensus on, what our hot buttons are, what's essential, what can be put off. And then see if that takes us to items on the December, where that puts us in terms of subsequent meetings and action we might want to take.
That seems sensible to me. Any comments, further comments on that? Ms. Beakey.
Just that obviously the recording is also available if people want to refresh their memory as far as what the discussions were, or if they didn't have a chance to be there. And then the other thing is as we go through the list, as Ms. Douglas was saying, we can also tag those things that we think are master plan issues, because I think keeping that in our consciousness is important as we look at all of these different items that come up and seem to be related to that issue. But I think that sounds reasonable to address in that format.
Mr. Gantina.
Yeah, I think that sounds makes perfect sense to me. I actually did watch the video of the entire meeting. I thought it was a great discussion. I agree that there's, if we set a time limit to reviewing the minutes, I think we'll quickly be able to filter out things that we don't want to spend more time or don't feel that we need to spend more time on. We'll be much more effectively be able to direct staff of where we would like them to spend their time, understanding that may be an ask of a fair amount of time from them. So I think it makes sense in terms of the process that we just talked about.
All right. I just got a thumbs up there from Mr. Twing. So any other comments on this? All right. Very good. So what did I do with my agenda? Misplaced it somehow. Oh, here we go. Nope, that's not it. Well, I think that's the end of the agenda. That's what I think. I don't know what I did with my agenda. I apologize. Oh, here it is. Last thing on here, adjournment. Is there a motion?
I'll move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Support.
Support by Mr. Klooster. I'm going to call for the vote to adjourn. Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Commissioner Douglas.
Yes.
Ms. Beakey.
Yes.
Mr. Klooster.
Yes.
Mr. Gantina.
Yes.
Meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. List, Mr. Twing. Appreciate it. See you next time.
Good job, Gary.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks, everybody.